Chapter 1204. Back in the car, Li Nanheng glanced in the rearview mirror at Feng Ling, who carefully put her hand in her pocket and smiled in satisfaction. He raised his hand to adjust the angle of the rearview mirror casually and turned to look at her. It's already dark. What do you want to eat tonight? Do you want to eat first and then go back to the hotel? Feng Ling came back to herself. Whatever. Li Nanheng reached over and rubbed her soft hair. What are you waiting for? Come back to yourself. Feng Ling had come back to herself, but she was still a little stunned by the gift that suddenly fell from the sky in her pocket. She had never received any gifts since she was a child. In the base, everyone could come out to have fun on holidays or birthdays, but it was strictly forbidden to give each other birthday gifts, so the men in the base had long been used to it. They didn't give her anything and just drank whenever they wanted. In the past few years, Feng Ling didn't get too close to anyone. It seemed that Jean Wan had given her some small things, but she didn't call them gifts and just gave them to her naturally. So this was really her first time. Her first time was so precious. Li Nanheng, the boss of 11 Base, had already made several exceptions for her. She gently stroked the cold dial in her pocket with her hand. When the man stopped the car at a red light and turned to look at her again, she remembered what he had just asked and said, I ate a lot at noon and am not hungry yet. It's okay if I don't eat tonight. It's not 5:00 yet. I'll still be hungry at night. Then. Feng Ling thought for a while. Although I only lived in China for a few months, I still have a deep impression of some of the food there, especially hot pot. Can I eat hot pot? Li Nanheng looked at her and then at the time. He didn't answer immediately but suddenly turned the car to a roundabout ahead and quickly drove to the road on the left. Until he stopped in front of a large supermarket, he motioned for her to get out of the car and said, This is Los Angeles after all. If you want to eat authentic hot pot in the United States, you have to ask around, and the food you find may not be to your taste. Let's go buy some meat rolls, vegetables, and hot pot ingredients and cook hot pot by ourselves after dinner. Feng Ling didn't know that hot pot could be cooked by herself and immediately nodded happily. Okay. Seeing her instantly agree, Li Nanheng didn't feel guilty at all for deceiving the little girl. There was a very famous hot pot restaurant in Los Angeles nearby. It was opened by a Chinese couple, but the queue was very long. It would take at least 3 to 4 hours to get back to the hotel. Now that the sky was already dark, he didn't want to waste a single moment outside. It would be better to cook hot pot for her in the hotel room and hold the little woman in his arms when she was satisfied. Anyway, when she was full, he could start to feed himself. These 3 to 4 hours were so precious that he could only waste it on the bed and not on other places. If she really wanted to eat, he wouldn't mind bringing her out tomorrow afternoon to make it up to her. This time, the goal of buying things in the supermarket was clearer. In half an hour, she bought all the things and returned to the car. Feng Ling was really not a foodie in the past, but after living in China for a while, she found that she really missed a lot of food in China. Now when she thought of the hot pot to eat later in the car, she couldn't wait to go to the hotel immediately. When they finally arrived at the hotel, Feng Ling forgot all the things that would happen in the hotel tonight. She didn't care about being embarrassed and took the initiative to get out of the car to help him carry the things. She carried various vegetables and meat rolls in her hands and her face was full of expectation. Although Li Nanheng couldn't wait anymore, he didn't want to let her down. After returning to the room, he asked the hotel staff to bring up the induction cooker and the newly bought pot. In the end, he still helped her cook the hot pot. There was no chili in the hot pot. It was not Sichuan style but the kind of hot pot with stock. However, because it was too hot, Feng Ling's cheeks were still red and there was sweat on her forehead. She used her hand to fan her red lips as she ate. Seeing that her usually pale lips were red, Li Nanheng became more and more absent-minded. In the end, he simply left her sitting here to eat alone and got up to go to the bathroom. Where are you going? Feng Ling saw him get up and subconsciously asked. At the same time, she stuffed a piece of tofu into her mouth. Take a shower. You eat first. Feng Ling nodded again. It wasn't until the sound of water came from the bathroom that Feng Ling's chopsticks paused. She suddenly remembered that she still had a tough battle to fight tonight. However, listening to the sound of water in the bathroom, the burning feeling on her face instantly became even hotter. She quickly put down her chopsticks and sat on the chair to think for a long time. She felt that her head and body were covered in sweat, but no matter how big this hotel suite was, there was only one bathroom. She was definitely too embarrassed to go in and take a shower with Li Nanheng. Furthermore, she was already full and couldn't eat any more, so she just sat here and listened to the sound of water in the bathroom for a while, feeling a little uncomfortable. When Li Nanheng came out of the bathroom, the man walked out of the bathroom wearing a dark blue bathrobe. His thin and cool short hair was still dripping with water. The water rolled down from the man's chin and submerged into the loose bathrobe. He was about to come over to light a cigarette when he saw that the induction cooker in front of Feng Ling seemed to have been turned off for a long time. Feng Ling, who had been eating earlier, was sitting there thinking about something. The man's good-looking brows moved. I'm not eating anymore. I'm full. When Feng Ling spoke, she was too embarrassed to look at him, even though she knew he was wearing a bathrobe. All right. It's not easy to digest if you eat too much at night. If you still want to eat, I'll find time to take you out to eat tomorrow. The man picked up the cigarette box and put it down again, looking deeply at her. Even though the man didn't say anything or do anything, Feng Ling couldn't resist his burning gaze and quickly stood up. I'm going to take a shower too. With that, without waiting for Li Nanheng to speak, she quickly entered the bathroom and closed the door. Hearing the sound of her locking the bathroom door, Li Nanheng curved his lips and raised his hand to casually tug at his still dripping hair. When he heard the sound of water coming from inside, he smiled. Chapter 1205. The sound of water continued in the bathroom. In fact, there was a bathtub next to it, but Feng Ling didn't want to soak in it. When she was washing her hair, she inexplicably thought of what Li Nanheng said in the supermarket today when he said that the size of the box of condoms she chose was not suitable for him. Although she wanted to take the initiative today, she still felt a little sad when she thought of the painful memories from the previous 2 times. Li Nanheng was not a gentleman at all. Not everyone could enjoy so much warmth and patience to her. She knew this very well. What she also knew was that this man could torment her half to death even when she was seriously ill. Last time in T-City, she didn't even have a chance to sleep. This man was purely ferocious in bed, and the more she cried and begged for mercy, the fiercer and fiercer he became. It seemed that he wouldn't give in to her and dote on her as much as he usually did. Feng Ling even wondered if she should buy a life-prolonging pill in advance. No matter how she thought about it, she still took a bath. She suddenly remembered that when she left the base, she didn't think so much and didn't bring any change of clothes. She didn't bring the clothes she bought in the mall today. She looked at the clothes that had just been changed with the smell of hot pot, and then at the other white bathrobe and bath towel hanging next to it in the bathroom. She blushed and was too embarrassed to go out with the bath towel wrapped around her. Instead, she first wrapped the bath towel and then took the bathrobe to put it on. In this way, she was tightly dressed inside and outside, and had to push the door open to go out. Because she had taken a bath for too long, the bathroom was still a little hot, but outside the bathroom, it was clean and bright. The man's tall and straight figure was standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window by the dining table where she had just eaten hot pot. The lights outside the window were bright, and it had even begun to snow. Li Nanheng was looking out of the window and turned back when he heard the sound. The moment their eyes met, Feng Ling suddenly didn't know how to speak. She opened her mouth and stammered, I'm done. The little woman's cheeks were red, and her short hair was wet and hung on her cheeks. When he looked at her, she seemed to be a little uncomfortable and raised her hand to touch her own hair, then turned to look in the direction of the bathroom, saying, My clothes are still in there. I'll go get them. No, call the hotel staff to bring them over for dry cleaning. The man stopped her. Come here. Fong Ling's footsteps faltered and she turned to look at him thoughtfully. "Come here," he repeated in a slower voice. Fong Ling looked at the man and the falling snow outside the window behind him and hesitated for a moment before she walked over. She had just taken 2 steps when the man raised his eyebrows coldly. "Am I a terrorist with dozens of explosives tied to my body or what? What are you afraid of?" Fong Ling said in her heart. "If you were a terrorist with dozens of explosives tied to your body, I wouldn't be afraid of you," but his particularly patient and gentle tone. However, she still braced herself and walked over. As soon as she walked to the window, the man hugged her and touched the heavy equipment on her body. He lowered his head and saw that she was wearing a bathrobe and towel. He immediately laughed and stroked her wet head. "It's snowing quite heavily. I don't think we can drive back to the base tomorrow morning. You've been busy accompanying the people of the youth training team from morning to night. It's rare for you to take this opportunity to sleep in. I don't seem to have the habit of sleeping in." Fong Ling looked away from the man's face stiffly and did not look at him. At this moment, the man's voice whispered into her ear and he hugged her tightly from behind. "That'll have to wait until you can get up tomorrow morning." Fong Ling did not want to speak. She stared at the snow outside and thought for a moment, but she suddenly felt a warmth on her neck. The man's kiss had already fallen. She felt uncomfortable and stiff, not knowing what to do. Her mind kept replaying the previous 2 experiences, but she found that the first time on the snow mountain, she was completely stunned. She was so passive that she almost forgot the process and only remembered that it was very painful. As for the second time, at that time, she was also at a loss. Li Nanheng drove her the whole time. She remembered that she was also in terrible pain at that time. Later, she was so tired that she even cried under him. Her head was dizzy and she didn't remember what to do. Right now, she stood there with her neck shrunk. She subconsciously wanted to hide, but she didn't want to resist. The man's kiss moved from her neck to her ear. His originally steady breathing gradually became hot and no longer steady. His slightly heavy breathing seemed to explode in Fong Ling's ears, causing her eardrums to tremble. He hugged her tightly and was not in a hurry to take off her bathrobe. He only focused on kissing her. For Li Nanheng, although he really wanted to throw her on the bed and get to the point, it was already a miracle that a man could hold on for so long in front of the woman he liked. There was no need for foreplay. But after all, he knew that Fong Ling's previous 2 experiences were almost forced. Right now, even if he forced himself to endure, he had to let her experience how he loved her well and give her enough time to prepare. The man held her and pressed her against the floor-to-ceiling window. In an instant, in front of her was a slightly cold window. She could still see the falling snow outside, but behind her was the man's hot and firm chest under his slightly opened bathrobe. She was stimulated by this feeling of ice and fire, and all the hair on her body stood on end. She didn't know where she kicked, but she seemed to have kicked the switch of the floor lamp by the side. In an instant, the lights in front of the window dimmed, and the lights behind them also dimmed. The neon lights and snow outside the window were even brighter, and the 2 people in front of the window were hidden in a charming darkness. In the darkness, Li Nanheng hugged her and kissed her non-stop. He kissed very attentively, and gradually, her nervousness gradually disappeared. When the man turned her body around, she didn't notice when the bathrobe slipped off her shoulders. However, it only slipped halfway, and the bathrobe was stuck on her arms. It was as though her arms were tied behind her back, and she couldn't move. She moved, and the man took the opportunity to press her against the window harder and kiss her deeper. There was the sound of water intertwining in the air, causing Fong Ling's entire body to burn up. Chapter 12:06. The room was very quiet. The falling snow outside did not disturb the silence. They could hear each other's breathing, heartbeat, and the touch of lips. The man held her face and kissed her. When he changed the angle, there was still a slight moist sound. Fong Ling tried very hard to breathe as usual, but it was useless. Under Li Nanheng's kiss and touch, her breathing gradually became more and more disordered. She was considered very tall among women, but Li Nanheng was able to easily cover her. His figure was strong and tall. The man held her in his warm embrace, demanding more. Feng Ling was completely driven by him, but this time, he was obviously much more patient than that night in Tea City. At that time, he had drunk something dirty and his reason had been excluded. Now he was obviously trying to hold on to his reason. But this kiss was still gentle and lingering at the beginning, but it became deeper and deeper. He pried open her lips and teeth, rubbing and entangling, like a thirsty man drinking poison to quench his thirst, or like a man burning with fire trying to extinguish the fire on his body. But Feng Ling's gradually tentative response was not much cool water that could extinguish the fire, but oil poured on the fire, burning endlessly, and smoke rose everywhere. She didn't know when her bathrobe completely fell to the ground. In the darkness, only the snow outside the window reflected a little bit of light, but it was not clear, and the sound of the man's Adam's apple moving was mixed in the air. Perhaps the bath towel wrapped around Feng Ling was too loose, or the man hurriedly undid his bathrobe and took her bath towel down with him. In this world in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, there was gradually an uncontrollable soft moan, but more of it was the man's excited gasp when he looked at her. Feng Ling didn't even notice when she was naked. Before she could adapt to the coolness of the window, she felt Li Nanheng's kiss gradually moving down her neck, then her collarbone, and then down. Feng Ling let out a low gasp and leaned her neck back, but she could only lean against the window. She felt ashamed and excited by this wet and hot kiss. She blushed. Fortunately, it was very dark around, so the man couldn't see the burning color on her face, but she still carefully put her hand on the window behind her. Are we going to do it here? What? The man looked up vaguely and met Feng Ling's wet eyes. Li Nanheng originally wanted to hear Feng Ling's words clearly and wait for her to repeat it again. However, when he raised his head and glanced at her, the man who thought he could still hold on felt his scalp go numb. The blood in his head almost gushed out, and he could no longer suppress the fierce desire in his body. He kissed her, rubbed her, and hugged and kissed her for a long time. Panting, he slightly released her lips but reluctantly lowered his head to kiss her again. He asked hoarsely, "What did you say just now?" "I said, are you going to do it here? Don't you want to go to bed?" Feng Ling's heart was beating very fast. She didn't know how to find her breath in such a fierce kiss. After being kissed for a long time, she was already a little dizzy and her voice was also hoarse. "Here by the window." Li Nanheng paused. God knew where he borrowed his reason to remember that she was thin-skinned. Although he not only wanted to do it in front of the window, but also on the sofa, the table, the kitchen, the bathroom, and everywhere else, in order to let her have a more peaceful experience, he patiently carried her from the floor-to-ceiling window, turned, and walked straight into the soft big bed in the bedroom. The last bit of light outside the window gradually moved away, and the direction of the bed was even darker. Some excitement that had been bred in his mind and body for a long time finally began to jump out of the cage. At this moment, the blood all over Li Nanheng's body was boiling hot. This was Feng Ling, his Feng Ling. The big river crab of life, please go to Weibo. He murmured hoarsely in her ear, "Don't be afraid, I'm not afraid, leave it to me. Be good. It'll be fine. It won't hurt anymore." The scene of that night in the snow mountain flashed in Feng Ling's mind. The man's strong and even somewhat hard muscles. Her own weak legs. The ice and snow outside the Rogers Pass, and the warmth in the tent, it was a dream that she didn't dare to recall even once. Suddenly, it gradually became clear in her mind. She remembered that at that time, even if Li Nanheng's fever was severe, even if he was unconscious, he was calling her name at that time. Even if he was unconscious at that time, the person he wanted was always her. This was too exciting. Feng Ling's consciousness was hazy. She looked at the man on top of her and whispered something. The man suddenly bent down and sealed her lips hard. She had never seen Li Nanheng like this, even that night in Tea City, when he couldn't find his reason, he didn't look like this. His eyes were red and seemed to be beastly, but he still stared at her passionately. Outside the window, it was snowing heavily, and the air in the room was boiling hot. The man's sweat dripped down like magma. There was a gap in the middle of the curtains that was not closed too tightly. The light of the early morning outside shone in through the gap and was cast on the feet of the two people at the end of the bed. One of the slender, white legs and the pair of small feet were sandwiched between the other pair of slender, strong, and thin legs. Under the light, the skin seemed to be exuding white light. Fong Ling had just been carried into the bathroom to wash. She didn't wear any clothes and was stuffed into the quilt by the man, who forced her to sleep in his arms. She was already in a daze just now. She couldn't remember whether she was crying or shouting. At this moment, she was in a daze and wanted to fall asleep quickly. However, she could still feel the man holding her tightly in his arms. He pressed against her back and gently patted her waist as though he was comforting her from overexertion just now. She felt that although the man was holding her from behind and had helped her wash, he was ready to let her sleep. However, such a close posture still made Fong Ling drowsily feel the change in his unsatisfied part. She closed her eyes lazily. When the man held her more tightly in his arms, he gradually moved down, kissed her ear and neck, and begged for mercy. "Don't let me go." The man was in a good mood. Hearing her words, he smiled and kissed her shoulder, turned her over, and kissed her. Fong Ling frowned and tried to push him away but couldn't. She had to open her eyes and look at him. He kissed her on the lips shamelessly and said vaguely, "All right, I'll listen to you. I won't let you go." Fong Ling, there was still a gap between her and the first place in the monthly votes, but it was already very good. Qingqing still fulfilled her promise. On Weibo, today is the last day of the month. Continue to work hard next month. Dear friends, you must give me the monthly votes today and tomorrow's first. In the future, I will try to find time to make up for the meet in Tea City. Thank you for your support. Chapter 1207. He saw that she was so weak that she couldn't even lift her arms. They hung by her sides and her whole body was soft. He kissed her forehead and asked hoarsely, "Did it still hurt last night?" "It shouldn't hurt. At most, your throat will hurt." The man's heavy breath was by her ear, and his voice seemed to be moist. "You screamed so hard that you didn't sleep last night. It's all thanks to you." Fong Ling didn't know what kind of person she was usually. Under his body, the corners of her eyes were red, and she was trembling and panting. Sometimes, she frowned, and sometimes, she couldn't help making long or high sounds that she tried hard to suppress. He couldn't control her like this. She closed her eyes and didn't move, but her ears were burning because of his words. Seeing that she couldn't continue to sleep, the man chuckled and said by her ear, "I let you go just now because you cried too hard, but it doesn't mean that I'm really done." Hearing this, Fong Ling abruptly opened her eyes and stared blankly at the man who was still not satisfied. She subconsciously tried to move away from his arms and tried to move forward, but the man gently hugged her and pressed her into his arms, unable to move. At the same time, Li Nanheng pulled her hand down. "You're still in this state after I helped you take a bath. It's all your fault." Fong Ling was angry. He had tortured her for the whole night, but he was still not satisfied. She grabbed the pillow under her head and was about to hit him. "You beast. I want to sleep. If you don't let me sleep, I'll shoot you." The man held her hand tightly and pressed it against his. Fong Ling's lips were blocked in time. For a moment, she couldn't say a word and only felt that the top of her head was steaming. "I can't help it. I've held it in for too long. How many years has it been?" The man continued to kiss her deeply through the gap between the curtains. He continued to kiss her neck, which was already filled with ambiguous red marks. He was almost intoxicated. After kissing for a while, even Fong Ling, who was so tired that she was about to collapse, could not restrain herself. This entire night, she had been constantly pressed by this man, and her entire body was still in a sensitive state. Although she was tired, she could not bear the slightest provocation, and the passion between the bed became stronger. Li Nanheng heard Feng Ling say something between their lips. Her voice was low, hoarse, tired, and a little embarrassed, but it was still the voice that tempted him uncontrollably in bed. How many times do you want to do it before you're satisfied? The sky is already bright. Her voice was almost trembling at the end. Because of the man's movements under the blanket, her body trembled violently, and she was drowned in shame once again. At noon, Li Nanheng's cell phone kept ringing. Li Nanheng frowned impatiently. 2 seconds later, Feng Ling, who was about to get up, suddenly opened her eyes, sat up, and turned the phone to silent. She glanced at the caller ID, did not answer it, and threw the phone back to the bed. Feng Ling sank into the soft and fluffy quilt. She was usually alert, but this time, she was not woken up by the ringing of the bell and was still sleeping soundly under the quilt. Li Nanheng didn't remember how many times they did it last night. He only saw a few used condoms in the indoor trash can not far away, and even the 3 boxes of Okamoto 001 had been used up. He also opened another spare box in another hotel bathroom. This morning, he rubbed her under the quilt for a while and did it twice. In the end, Feng Ling almost fainted and could not even scream, but her cheeks were still so red that he could not find his reason. There was no way he could be merciful. Li Nanheng leaned against the headboard and touched Feng Ling's forehead. He didn't remember where he had heard that some women were particularly fragile. If they suddenly experienced too much passion, it might even cause them to have a fever and other symptoms of overwork. Of course, this kind of situation was rare, but he was very clear about what he had done to her last night, so he was more or less worried about her body. But under his palm, her body temperature was not hot, but very warm. At this time, he couldn't help but think of the night on the snow mountain. It was her first time, and she lay in bed for 3 days. Would she really be seriously ill at that time? She could endure it now, but she was in such a deep sleep that she wouldn't be able to hear or feel anything if the sky didn't fall on her. Seeing that her shoulder was accidentally exposed by the edge of the quilt because of Weiwei's movements in her dream, Li Nanheng lifted the quilt for her. After all, the weather was cold. There was air conditioning in the hotel room, but the air was still a little cold. Fearing that she would catch a cold or wake up from the cold, Li Nanheng lifted the quilt for her. Feng Ling instinctively hugged the quilt in her sleep, and her face was red. Before dawn, he had carried her into the bathroom to take a shower, but after the 2 times, he was afraid that if he helped her take a shower again, he would start a fire again. He was afraid that he would do it again, so he didn't take her to clean up again. Fortunately, he used condoms, so it was not too messy. But he was still worried, in case Feng Ling woke up and lost her temper with him. The man gently reached into the quilt, touched her waist, and then continued to slide down to make sure that she was no longer sweating in the morning. He also confirmed that her body was very clean, and her skin was smooth, in line with her usual state of love for cleanliness. However, after touching for a while, he pinched her slender waist hard, lowered his eyes to look at Feng Ling, who was almost unconscious, and kissed the tip of her nose. At this time, the phone rang again, but it was the hotel landline beside the bed, not his cell phone. Li Nanheng picked it up, and the hotel staff's polite and respectful voice came from the inside. The reason was that the hotel had prepared lunch. Because they didn't have breakfast in the morning, they reminded them to eat lunch in time, lest they starved. Li Nanheng ordered lunch on the phone and asked them to send it over. He still remembered that Feng Ling wanted to eat hot pot. Last night, he cooked it here himself because he was in a hurry. Today, he had to find an opportunity to let her have a good bite of the most authentic local hot pot in Los Angeles, so he didn't order much for lunch in the hotel. Most of the food was easy to digest, in case her stomach felt uncomfortable after she woke up. Half an hour later, the phone call came again. It was the room service who pushed the dining cart to the door. Li Nanheng got up and went out to pick up the bathrobe that was scattered on the ground last night, put it on, and went to open the door. The hotel staff hurriedly prepared the lunch after ordering it, and it was still hot. 4M. Chapter 1208. Fong Ling was really tired. She had used up too much energy and didn't wake up until 1 p.m. The curtains in the room, which originally let in a trace of light, were tightly closed. They were all floor-to-ceiling windows, which showed how big the curtains were. She got up from the bed. Because the curtains were closed, everything was dark except for the wall lamp in front of the bed. She found her phone by the bed and picked it up to take a look. It was already so late. In the darkness, the phone screen was too dazzling. Fong Ling narrowed her eyes. The scene of her being tormented by the man on this bed made her brain stiff for a long time. In fact, Li Nanheng was not really so unreasonable. At least at the beginning, he would pay attention to whether she was comfortable or not and would ask her gently from time to time if it hurt. Although she couldn't answer at that time, at least at the beginning, he was much gentler than later. How did it gradually get out of control? It seemed that she said something to him while crying under him. She even said that sentence in a trembling voice because of the fullness in her heart and the satisfaction in her body. After that almost voluntary confession, this man seemed to have gone crazy and adjusted her countless positions on the bed. Later, for a few hours, she vaguely remembered, she was tossed around so much that she couldn't close her legs. She remembered that the man had said a lot of words that made her blush when she was in a daze. At that time, she was stuttering and couldn't think normally. Basically, she said whatever he wanted her to say. She didn't know what he wanted her to say. When she fell asleep again in the morning, she felt that Li Nanheng seemed to want to carry her to take a shower again, but she didn't know why he gave up in the end and just held her here to sleep. The bathrobe that slipped to the ground last night was placed by the bed, or maybe it was a new bathrobe that Li Nanheng asked the room service staff for. She only glanced at it and did not put it on. Instead, she picked up another piece of clothing next to her. It was the shirt that Li Nanheng had worn yesterday. The shirt seemed to have the faint, refreshing, and pleasant smell of Li Nanheng's body. Before she got off the bed, her phone suddenly rang. She looked down and saw that it was a message from Li Nanheng. Li Nanheng woke up. Fong Ling was startled. There was no camera in this room, and Li Nanheng was not by her side. How did he know that she was awake? Did he send the message by coincidence and wait for her to wake up? Or did he really guess that she was awake? Then, the man's message came again. If you don't want to get up, go back to sleep. There's no rush. The roads are blocked by heavy snow, and the suburban roads are too thick to pass through. I don't think I can go back to the base today. I will call the transportation bureau and ask them to clear the road before tomorrow morning. Seeing the words heavy snow-blocked road, Fong Ling hurriedly got up and got off the bed. However, as soon as she got off the bed, her feet suddenly softened, and she stumbled back onto the bed. After resting for a long time, she was finally able to get up. She walked to the window and pulled the curtains open. The moment she opened the curtains, she was almost blinded by the bright light. She narrowed her eyes and saw the plain white snow outside. Even though this was a bustling city street, she could still see the places on the buildings that couldn't be cleared by the snowplows. The snow on the main road in the city had long been cleared. On the ground, black and white patches of asphalt could be seen, and the snow was piled up on both sides of the road. Looking at the situation, it was indeed possible that the suburbs hadn't been cleared yet. After all, 11 Base couldn't be located in the city, but in the suburbs a little further away from downtown Los Angeles. No one would use that road except for the people of the base, so if it didn't affect the normal progress of the base's mission, it was understandable that these people didn't rush to clear this road first. Unless there was an important mission, 11 Base, a militarized place, would definitely put the people first. They could wait for the snow to be cleared in other places first. Fong Ling thought that it shouldn't be too far from here. If she got up early tomorrow and drove back early, she could return to the base before the morning training. The phone thrown on the bed vibrated again. She turned to pick it up. This time, it was the weather forecast. It said that there would be heavy snow this afternoon. After reading it, she glanced at the message sent by Li Nanheng and replied, "I'm awake." After about 2 or 3 minutes, the other side replied, "It will probably take a while to go back. If you are tired, continue to sleep. If you are not sleepy, get up and take a shower. I didn't help you bathe later. You should not be too comfortable now." How could it not be comfortable? Li Nanheng was a man who was obsessed with cleanliness. Except for last night, when he was crazy, he at least carefully washed her inside and outside in the morning. When he carried her to take a shower, Feng Ling almost went crazy. Later, he continued to do it on the bed twice, but at least in the morning, Li Nanheng was not as crazy as last night. So she was very clean. There was no trace at all. But in the daytime, she was discussing with a man about whether she was clean or not and whether she was tired or not. Feng Ling didn't look at his words directly but still replied with that N. No matter how clean she was, she still had to take a shower. Last night, she could still take a shower standing, but now she only had the strength to sit in the bathtub. She was relaxing in the bathtub full of hot water when Li Nanheng sent a message. After a while, he saw that the lunch he asked the hotel to deliver at noon was still on the table. It should be cold now. If you are not hungry, you don't have to eat it. Wait for me. I see that you don't have the strength to go out, so I promise to let you have a good hot pot meal. I will bring back all the ingredients from the hot pot city. You don't have to come out in the afternoon. Have a good rest and wait for me. She was just thinking that she was tired and hungry. No matter how good Li Nanheng's physical strength was, he was the one who had been working up there. Wasn't he tired or sleepy? What urgent matter could make him leave and the road was blocked by the heavy snow? She didn't expect that he went to buy various things for her to cook hot pot again. She smiled and replied with a "okay." After replying, she put down the phone and continued to sit in the bathtub with half-closed eyes. When she was about to fall asleep comfortably, she heard the phone vibrate in her ear. She half opened her eyes and picked up the phone in a daze, only to see a message from a strange number. Come to the underground parking lot of the hotel. 4M. Chapter 1209. Seeing that it was a message from an unknown number, Feng Ling propped up her wet head with one hand and looked at the words, feeling a little puzzled and surprised. She wondered who this person was. She was surprised that this person seemed to know that she was in this hotel. Did he follow them or was he from the hotel? Just when she was thinking about whether to ask Li Nanheng, that person sent another message. It's me. Can't you guess who I am? Come down. I have something for you. Feng Ling held the phone and pondered for a while. She thought it might be a friend from Boston. She remembered that many people had said that they would come to Los Angeles to find her recently. Although it was just a verbal agreement, she had never had a chance to come. She saw that this number belonged to Los Angeles and guessed that it might be a friend from Los Angeles who changed his phone number after coming here. Who could it be? Although she felt that there was something wrong with this way of greeting, Feng Ling had a certain level of martial arts. It was impossible for ordinary people to do anything to her, so she had nothing to worry about. She got up from the bathtub and went out to see a new set of clothes on the sofa. Li Nanheng must have asked the hotel staff to send it over. After all, she couldn't wear yesterday's clothes anymore. She put on her clothes and went downstairs. She took the elevator to the underground parking lot of the hotel. Of course, she had a gun in her pocket. She would never let her guard down. In the end, after she appeared in the underground parking lot, she didn't see anyone there. There were many cars parked around, and she couldn't see which cars were occupied and which ones weren't. She glanced at the message on her phone again. After not seeing anyone for so long, she became even more vigilant. Just as she was about to turn to leave, a figure suddenly jumped out from a corner. The figure carried a strong smell of alcohol. At the moment he pounced on her, Feng Ling instinctively turned back and punched him, but the other party suddenly bent down and hugged her leg. Wife, don't leave me, wife. I know I was wrong. Suddenly being hugged by someone, Feng Ling immediately lowered her head in shock, only to see that it was a man in his 40s who was almost bald on his head who was hugging her and crying. Even though she was wearing pants that were separated by the material of her pants, being suddenly hugged like this and calling her wife, she still felt disgusted and had goosebumps all over her body. She shouted angrily, "Who are you? Let go. Honey, I know I was wrong. Honey, I won't go out and have fun anymore. Please come home, honey." Usually, when Li Nanheng teased her, he would call her little wife. Although Feng Ling was unhappy, she had never been unhappy in her heart. Now that a strange drunkard suddenly called her his wife, Feng Ling felt extremely disgusted. Her whole body was filled with resistance. She didn't have time to think about why there were so many Chinese people in Los Angeles and why the drunkard she met in the underground parking lot also called her in Chinese. Vaguely, it seemed that something had been arranged. She just kept kicking the man in disgust. However, just as she was about to turn around and leave, the man staggered to his feet and continued to hug her leg tightly. "Wifey, wifey, don't go. Get lost." Feng Ling was furious. She turned around and kicked him away again. If it weren't for the fact that she still had a trace of rationality left in her, which warned her not to kill people casually outside the base except for carrying out missions, she would bring trouble to the base. She forcibly suppressed this disgusting anger and picked up her phone to check what was wrong with the text message just now. For some reason, she didn't see any acquaintances, but a drunkard suddenly ran out. To her surprise, the drunkard suddenly shouted, "Ah," and temporarily attracted her attention. Feng Ling looked back and saw that he staggered to his feet on the ground and then ran to her with a grin while calling her wife. Feng Ling avoided him with disgust. Seeing that there were too many cars here, she simply walked to the empty space in front, holding the phone in her hand, and gradually became more suspicious and vigilant in her heart. "Honey, I really didn't mean to." The drunkard was still standing between the cars and crying, which made her heart upset. At this moment, Feng Ling suddenly heard the sound of a car coming in from the parking lot on the left. She turned around and saw that it was Li Nanheng's black Hummer. She recognized the license plate number of the car. Seeing that he was back, she was slightly relieved because of the text message just now and quickly took a few steps to greet him. Suddenly, behind her, the right side of the parking lot lit up with a strong light. Feng Ling suddenly felt that the black Hummer in front of her suddenly turned on a pair of headlights at the same time as if to remind her of something. She turned around and saw that the light behind her was particularly dazzling. A shabby silver SUV rushed toward her at a speed dozens of times faster than the standard speed in the parking lot. Feng Ling was still annoyed by the drunkard and paused for a moment while holding the phone in her hand. When she reacted and was about to quickly jump away, she suddenly heard Li Nanheng's voice in the black Hummer, "Back." She instinctively dodged in the direction he said, but after all, it was still too late. The car rushing toward her had already approached her. At this critical moment, two strong lights crossed each other, and then there was a loud bang. Feng Ling fell heavily to the ground. Her heart skipped a beat and she turned to look at the two cars that collided with each other. The collision was too serious. Although the SUV was very old, it was very strong and had obviously been reinforced. Even the front of Li Nanheng's car was deformed. Ignoring the pain in her knees, she immediately turned over and was about to go to the Hummer to take a look. However, as soon as she rushed over, she saw that in the window of the black Hummer, Li Nanheng stretched out his arm from the airbag that had just been shaken out and stabbed a few times with a dagger he carried with him. He decisively cut open the obstructing airbags and pierced all the airbags. Then, he smoothly reversed the car, put it in gear, and the wheels quickly spun. He rushed forward again, and with a bang, he hit the SUV in front of him again, pushing it back by a meter. Bang, the headlights of the two cars had been completely destroyed. Bang, the front of the car was completely destroyed. Bang, the windshield was also smashed into pieces. The people in the SUV obviously did not have such good physical fitness as Li Nanheng. Under such a violent impact, they had no strength to do anything. They were desperately stuck between the steering wheel and the seat in the car and had no way to escape. Chapter 12:10. Feng Ling knew that she should have only been 0.01 seconds away from death, but she didn't know how anxious and dangerous that scene was in Li Nanheng's eyes. She only saw Li Nanheng crazily hit the car. He didn't even have an airbag in his car. She shouted at him, "Stop, Li Nanheng, stop." After a few more hits, Li Nanheng hit the two SUVs until they were concave in the middle and protruding on both sides. Even if it was reinforced, it was still like a grandchild in front of Li Nanheng's car, especially when Li Nanheng used the strongest part of the car to hit it. Even though it looked like he was crazy, in fact, every hit was accurate and hard. The black Hummer finally stopped. Feng Ling rushed to the car door, only to see Li Nanheng walk out of the severely deformed car door. He grabbed Feng Ling, panting, and pulled her into his arms, hugging her tightly. "Li Nanheng, are you crazy?" Feng Ling raised her hand and clutched the clothes on his waist tightly. Thinking of the scene just now, her eyes turned red. "The airbag in your car is gone. You'll be injured. Do you think you're made of iron?" Li Nanheng hugged her tightly as if to make sure she was still in his arms. A moment later, the man's heavy breathing gradually calmed down. He kissed her gently on the side of her neck. "Why didn't you rest in the room? Why did you suddenly run out? You're usually so vigilant. What happened just now?" Feng Ling was about to talk about the text message when she remembered the drunkard just now. She turned her eyes abruptly, only to see that the drunkard was quietly moving out from behind the row of cars in front of them. She suddenly touched the blood on the back of Li Nanheng's hand. She guessed that he had been injured when he tried to pull out his hand from under the airbag and cut the airbag with a dagger. She held her breath, suddenly pulled out a gun from her waist, and shot the drunkard's slowly moving leg. If it weren't for the rule that the base couldn't kill indiscriminately outside except for missions, and the fact that she needed to keep the other party alive to obtain evidence, she really wanted to shoot the drunkard's head. He was obviously in cahoots with the half-dead man in the car. The drunkard was shot in the ankle. He screamed in pain and fell to the ground. He dragged his injured ankle and struggled to crawl out. Feng Ling decisively and quickly fired another shot, hitting the fixed screw under the road sign in Area AB in the parking lot in front of him. The road sign suddenly tilted and fell to the ground. A large blue square blocked the drunkard's way forward. She then turned to look at the SUV and saw an unfamiliar middle-aged man sitting in the driver's seat. However, the other party's head was already bleeding. She didn't know if he was dead or if he still had one last breath left. Just now, Li Nanheng clearly wanted to kill him. "I'll tell you when we get back," Feng Ling said as she retracted her gaze, looked down at Li Nanheng's hands that were still dripping with blood, and then looked up and down at him. "Where are you injured?" Seeing that the man's face was paler than usual, it was obvious that the impact just now had injured him quite badly. "I'm fine," the man said hoarsely and clenched her hand. Obviously, no matter how badly he was injured, it was more important than her unscathed. There was a large local hospital in Los Angeles nearby. After calling the emergency number and calling the police and doctors arrived immediately. This kind of obviously illegal murder didn't need 11 base to deal with it privately. The surveillance cameras in the underground parking lot could clearly restore what happened at the scene, and the police could directly investigate the truth of the whole matter. When the man in the SUV was carried out, he was covered with blood and didn't move at all like a dead man. Thinking of the scene where Li Nanheng's eyes were bloodshot and his face cold again and again, she clenched his wrist tightly, but the man held her hand in his palm. Even the drunkard who fell to the ground was taken away by the police. Due to her and Li Nanheng's identity and relationship in 11 base, although they were needed to go with the investigation, seeing that Li Nanheng was injured and Feng Ling's attitude was obviously cold and silent, she was unwilling to go with them for the time being, so she could only say that she would call them when needed. After getting their consent, she took the two people away. The doctor followed them up and entered the hotel room. After a brief examination, he came to a conclusion. In addition to the more than 10 centimeters long wound on Li Nanheng's arm by the dagger, There were also some small wounds on his forehead and the back of his hand by the glass. At that time, the impact was too strong, the car window had been broken, and the broken glass jumped into his flesh. The two cars collided several times in succession with too much force, and Li Nanheng experienced several strong impacts like a car accident at the same time. No matter how strong his physical fitness was, he was still a mortal. He had a slight concussion, but it was not particularly serious. He would be fine after a few days of rest. The doctor carefully took out the glass fragments that jumped into his flesh, applied medicine to the obvious wounds, and left some gauze and anti-inflammatory drugs. After making sure that Li Nanheng was fine, he left. After the doctor left, Feng Ling turned to wash the blood-stained towel. After washing it white, she took it out and continued to help Li Nanheng wipe his face. When she wiped his face, she carefully avoided the small wound on his forehead. She looked at the places on his body that were not serious but could be considered as external wounds. Then she thought of the scene where he crashed into the car without any regard for his life. Her heart instantly ached a little. This kind of feeling seemed to have occurred to her before. Yes, it was the day when she accidentally heard that Li Nanheng was married. Her whole body was a little numb, and her heart had been twitching. It hurt so much that she didn't even have the strength to cry out in pain. Feng Ling was still helping him wipe, and now she had already wiped his neck. Li Nanheng suddenly raised his hand and held her empty hand. "Don't move," Feng Ling ordered in a low voice. Li Nanheng grunted, closed his eyes, and did not move his head on the pillow. However, his hand still held hers and did not let go. He even inserted his fingers between her fingers and held hers. Even such an intimate action still made Feng Ling unable to calm down. She couldn't figure out what Li Nanheng, a person who had seen too many life and death situations, was thinking at that moment. He was extremely angry and extremely afraid, so he suddenly went crazy. He did it because of her. She knew. It was precisely because she knew that Feng Ling's heart was indescribably shocked. Chapter 12:11. She only knew that Li Nanheng liked her and loved her, but she didn't know that he loved her so much. After wiping all the exposed parts of his clothes, she saw that although the man didn't have much expression, she remembered that before the doctor left, he said that he had a slight concussion. She could see from his unchanging expression that he had a headache, but he didn't show it in front of her. After checking his wounds, she put the towel aside, carefully helped him sit up, turned behind him, and put his head on her lap. Li Nanheng was about to get up, but she pressed him down hard. "Don't move." From watching him hit the car with her own eyes to now, she was like a little woman who had been angry in her heart. Her words were close to an order, as if they were really the main drill master and deputy drill master. Li Nanheng sighed and glanced at her. "I'm really fine." At this time, Feng Ling's hand gently pressed on his head. She didn't know how to do it, but she tried her best to help him relieve his headache with her hands. She slowly rubbed his temples and his head with her fingers. Li Nanheng closed his eyes comfortably, turned his head slightly, and leaned against her lower abdomen. Since he couldn't refuse, he might as well enjoy it like this. "Does it hurt?" Feng Ling wasn't sure how strong her hand was. Seeing that he closed his eyes and didn't speak, she asked in a low voice. At the same time, she glanced at his hand that had been simply stopped bleeding and was covered with a piece of white gauze. Unexpectedly, the man suddenly raised his injured hand and pulled down the head of Feng Ling, who was massaging him seriously. She was afraid that her struggle would hurt his hand too much, so she was suddenly pulled down by his hand. The moment she lowered her head and bent down, the man kissed her hard on her lips. After kissing her, he let go of her. Feng Ling suddenly sat up again and continued to massage his head. She gritted her teeth and warned, "Don't move anymore. Don't you know that you have a headache?" She couldn't remember when she had a slight concussion after returning from a mission. Although she recovered in a few days, she remembered that in the first few days, she had a headache and nausea every day and didn't want to move at all. "I'm not that weak. Why are you so nervous?" After the man kissed her, he willingly stopped moving. He rested his head on her lap and looked at her from below. Tell me, what happened just now? Feng Ling took out her cell phone and showed it to him. It's a message from an unknown number. At first, I thought it was a new number that a friend of mine changed to after arriving in Los Angeles. I was a little suspicious and guarded, but the mastermind clearly knew that I would be vigilant and suddenly arranged a drunkard to disturb me. At that time, I was annoyed by the drunkard and couldn't concentrate too much, so this accident happened. I'll pay attention in the future and won't make such a mistake again. Indeed, if Feng Ling's vigilance had been high enough, with her own agility, she would have been able to move back quickly. But at that time, no matter how fast her reaction speed was, it was still no match for the other party's car. If Li Nanheng hadn't bumped into her in time, she would have been directly knocked away. With the speed of the car, she would have been killed on the spot. Now, she wouldn't even have the chance to sit here and take a breath. Li Nanheng felt comfortable being pressed by her and couldn't help closing his eyes again. He only closed his eyes and said lightly, "Have you offended anyone outside the base?" "No, you should know very well how I usually do things. I never cause trouble, and I don't speak much to outsiders. How could I have offended anyone? Usually, the people who don't get along with me are the original members of Team 3, but they have been in the base for so many years, and they can be considered to be above board. Usually, they just want to talk. It's absolutely impossible for them to have the courage to do such an impulsive thing." Li Nanheng was silent for a moment and suddenly opened his eyes, looking at Feng Ling, who was still massaging his head obediently. She didn't offend anyone, so her existence threatened someone's interests, or someone was afraid of her existence. She was someone who even handed over all her bank cards to him. Usually, she was only in the base. How could there be any conflict of interest? The only thing that her existence would really threaten was Feng Mingzhu's inheritance rights in the Feng family, as well as her emotional interests and feelings. In addition, although Li Nanheng was only guessing, the possibility was not low, especially since Feng Mingzhu's actions were exposed last time. It was not impossible for her to go to extremes. He raised his other uninjured hand and touched Feng Ling's eyebrows. "All right, no need to massage." Feng Ling didn't move. She still insisted on massaging him, just wanting to make him more comfortable. The man smiled. "Your move just like that? You said that I'm made of iron, but I thought your heart was made of iron. You can't see how much I care about you." Feng Ling's expression suddenly became a bit unnatural. While massaging his head, she turned her face away slightly and looked out of the window. At the same time, she said in a low voice, "What do you mean by made of iron? If my heart was really made of iron, I wouldn't have taken the initiative to come out of the base with you. I knew what you were thinking, but I still came out with you." Li Nanheng laughed out loud. If it weren't for the fact that he really didn't have much strength right now, he would have gotten up and pressed her under him. He would have kissed her, hugged her, and, fiercely done it a few more times. After massaging for a while, Feng Ling thought that the man had fallen asleep on her lap. Suddenly, she heard him say in a low voice, "Today is just the beginning. The person behind this knows you well and even knows that you're in this hotel right now. I think you've been targeted. After returning to the base tomorrow, don't come out for the time being. Pay attention to the people around you. As for the people outside, focus on Feng Mingzhu." Hearing the words Feng Mingzhu, Feng Ling's hand did not stop. She also thought of this, but she was not sure. If it was really Feng Mingzhu, what was her motive? Was it just because she snatched Li Nanheng away? Or was there something deeper to it? She looked at the man who was lying on her lap with his eyes closed, enjoying her massage, and slowly pursed her lips without batting an eyelid. She always felt that Li Nanheng seemed to know something. Just like when she disguised as a man, he should have long known about it but did not immediately expose it. It was as though nothing could be hidden from him. "Don't worry. Even if it's a sneak attack, no one can easily hurt me," Feng Ling said softly. Chapter 12:12. The man chuckled and was not stingy with his mockery. Who was the person who was almost killed in the parking lot just now? Feng Ling. That was just an accident. I was careless. In the future, I will definitely be more vigilant. Nothing will happen again. Li Nanheng was sure of this. As long as Feng Ling really realized it and kept her vigilance at all times, no one could get close to her and hurt her. The man chuckled softly. So I should be grateful to you for letting your guard down this time, so you gave me a chance to save the damsel in distress? Feng Ling was expressionless. I'm the hero. The man raised his brows. Then what am I? She watched as the man rested on her lap. Although his face was slightly pale, it was still very good-looking. She placed the finger on her head on his chin and gently hooked it on his chin and face. You are beautiful. Being teased by Feng Ling, who had always been reserved in matters of the heart, the man abruptly got up to kiss her. Before he could move, Feng Ling continued to press his head hard. Don't move. Li Nanheng, he then sighed with a smile. Little hero, you just woke up. The hot pot ingredients you brought back are still in the car. Are you hungry? She was scared to death by the scene of him colliding with the car. How could she care about being hungry? Feng Ling said softly, I'm not hungry. It's fine if I don't eat for 1 or 2 meals occasionally. I'm hungry. When the man said these words, his eyes were fixed on her. This time, Feng Ling understood very quickly. When the man looked at her as he spoke, she immediately understood what he meant by hungry. Last night, he bullied her for so long, and he came twice in the morning. Hadn't she fed him enough? She did not speak but glared at him. Then she gently placed his head back on the pillow, got up, and picked up the fruit on the coffee table on the sofa. She picked up an orange and walked back. As she walked, she peeled it and stuffed the orange into the man's mouth. If you're hungry, eat the fruit first. One of the fruits that Li Nanheng hated the most was oranges. After being forced to take a bite, his entire face was so sour that he almost frowned. He tried to endure the taste of the orange and barely swallowed it. Looking at Feng Ling's calm appearance as she ate the orange, he was impressed. You can even eat such sour food. Those who don't know will think you're pregnant. Because of his words, she subconsciously glanced at the used condoms in the trash can. She quickly ate the remaining orange and said, It's not that sour. You think it's sour because you hate eating it, so your senses are magnified. A little sour taste is described as sour. In fact, it's quite sweet. Really? The man lay there obediently without moving. He probably would have a headache if he really moved, so he didn't move and asked in a low voice, How sweet is it? Feng Ling walked over to help him lift the blanket. However, at this moment, the man suddenly raised his hand and pressed her head down. Come, let me try it. Just as she was about to be kissed, Feng Ling quickly pressed the man's head back down, but she was careful not to make too much movement, lest it aggravate the discomfort of his concussion. However, after lying down for a long time, she guessed that he had recovered a lot and his face was not as pale as before. Thankfully, his injury was not serious. Otherwise, Feng Ling would not be in the mood to chat with him here. A few minutes later, the landline in the room rang. Feng Ling went to pick up the phone. It was a call from the police. After explaining the matter in detail, they asked if she had offended anyone or if there were any other clues. Feng Ling did not have any evidence, so she could not directly reveal the suspect. She simply told them what she saw and the text message she received. She also told them the number that sent the text message and hung up the phone. This call lasted for about 10 minutes. When she turned back, she saw that Li Nanheng's eyes were closed as if he had fallen asleep. The doctor did say that a concussion required more sleep and rest. No matter how good this man's stamina was, he didn't sleep at all last night or this morning. After going out, he probably didn't have a good rest. It was good to sleep for a while now. She was about to turn and walk out of the bedroom of the hotel suite when the man on the bed suddenly said, Be good in the room and don't go out. When the snow on the road is clear tomorrow morning, we'll return to the base. It won't delay the training of the youth team. Okay. Feng Ling responded. In fact, the balance in her heart was now leaning towards Li Nanheng. She could temporarily ask Han Jin to take care of the newbies in the base for a day or two. However, Li Nanheng's injury was not serious, so there was no need to trouble others, so she didn't say much. She only said, "I'll go get some food. You rest first." Li Nanheng, who was suddenly reduced to being taken care of by Feng Ling, did not speak but curved his lips slightly. Obviously, he was in a good mood. Feng Ling stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window last night and looked at the snow outside. According to the information revealed by the police on the phone just now, the drunkard was really drunk. Although he was conscious of doing something, his thinking and speaking were not very clear. They had to wait until the concentration of alcohol in his body was gone before they interrogated him again. The other driver in the car had been lying in the treatment room since he was taken away. He was almost at his last breath and had not woken up yet. However, they had found out the identity of the driver. He was a local taxi driver in Los Angeles. He had been in gambling debt since last month and owed more than 1 million yuan to Las Vegas. His wife left with their child in a fit of anger. This was the family situation of the man they found out. As for the account under his name, 3 days ago, he received a transfer of 2 million yuan from a mysterious anonymous account. Although the bank had the responsibility to cooperate with the police investigation and should try its best to find out who the mysterious account belonged to, some special banks in Los Angeles had a special system for some particularly rich families, that is, some VIP-level customers could hide their account names. In this case, it was very difficult to find out, because this mode of hiding account names could not be found by the bank system. This was the distinguished treatment they gave VIP-level customers, which could be regarded as a loophole that had not been discovered, so there was no way to find out. Feng Ling could think of only a few people who wanted to kill her. Except for the people she had offended in the past, there seemed to be no one else. But if those people wanted to secretly murder her, they definitely wouldn't use such a simple method. Those people were used to violence and blood, and they wouldn't be ruthless and meticulous in doing things. Such a level of treatment in the bank. She picked up her cell phone, opened the locked photo album inside, and looked at the photo of the jade ring and the jade pendant that she had taken, thoughtfully. Chapter 12-13. It was already 3:00 in the afternoon. Although they did not intend to inform the base of this matter, the base had more or less heard some rumors from the police. Feng specially called to ask if the base needed to resolve this matter. He was also concerned about Feng Ling's condition. After confirming that Li Nanheng's injuries were not serious and Feng Ling's emotions were not affected by this murder incident, he hung up the phone. However, before hanging up, he still said that Feng Ling was still a member of the base. In such a situation, the base could help her find the real culprit behind the scenes at any time. If this matter had nothing to do with Feng Mingzhu, it would not be a problem to leave it to the base. But now, even Feng Ling herself suspected Feng Mingzhu. This matter was related to the Feng family, and she and the Feng family. In short, it was not the time yet. Li Nanheng raised his wrist that the doctor had bandaged with gauze and comfortably rested on Feng Ling's lap again. If you're tired, close your eyes and sleep for a while. Feng Ling was still rubbing his head with her fingers and gently relaxing his temples and eyes from time to time. This way, his headache would be much better. At this moment, the hotel staff knocked on the door and delivered some ingredients that Feng Ling had asked them to buy. They also prepared some cooked food from the hotel. Feng Ling went to open the door, thanked them, and took the ingredients into the small kitchen in the suite. Although the hotel's kitchen was not big, fortunately, it was well equipped with seasonings and equipment. She had made a living in Boston for the past 2 years. Although she was not very proficient in cooking, she definitely knew how to do it. She washed and cut the fresh ingredients and specially used a pot to boil medicinal chicken soup. This was what she had learned from Xiao Ba in High City. At that time, it tasted good and she remembered the method. She turned around and continued to cut some diced beef. She also used eggs, vegetables, and other ingredients to stir-fry 2 simple side dishes. After making these things, it was not suitable to eat toast or sandwiches. She went to the hotel to ask for some white rice and cooked it. She helped Li Nanheng sit on the bed. His injured hand was placed on the table by the bed and his other hand was placed on his leg. Feng Ling stood by the bed. She scooped rice with a spoon to feed him, as well as various soups and stir-fried dishes. She fed him slowly, 1 mouthful at a time. However, she was also hungry, so while feeding him, she would occasionally take a few bites. Although she had prepared chopsticks, sometimes she would feed herself with a spoon out of habit. Although she had only done this 2 or 3 times, every time she mistakenly put the spoon he used into her mouth, she would be stunned. She looked up abruptly to see Li Nanheng sitting on the bed with a smile on his face in a very good mood. In this situation, she didn't have time to be shy or anything. She was also very straightforward. She had already done it, and it wasn't the first time. No matter how thin-skinned she was, it was time for her to pass this transition. Thus, she continued to feed him expressionlessly. However, this reminded her of the scene when she was injured or hospitalized in front of him. At that time, Li Nanheng often placed her in the most important position and often stayed by her side to take care of her. In the eyes of others, this cold and inhumane man seemed to really give her all his passion and patience. However, at that time, she always remained somewhat numb and did not respond. She even blindly believed that she should be a man and that nothing beyond her control should happen to her. However, in the end, she still unknowingly fell to this step. At that time, Li Nanheng was cold to her, but now, Li Nanheng ate contentedly and hugged her from the bed. He held her waist and held her in his arms, continuing to let her feed him medicinal chicken soup and food. I feel that I see many things too simply. Feng Ling held the bowl and allowed him to hold her like this. As she slowly fed him the soup, she said hesitantly and slowly, "I'm too selfish." She tightened her grip on the spoon. Since some things exist, I may have to face them sooner or later. Even if I don't want to face them, fate doesn't seem to want me to live like this forever. Her words were ambiguous, and most people would not be able to understand what she was saying. However, Li Nanheng heard it. She was thinking about her background and the Feng family. She was considering whether she should bravely face those things that were already close to the truth. But I don't think I'll like those. My world is very small. I can't accept so many complicated people and things. Before she could finish speaking, Li Nanheng suddenly pressed her heavily into his arms. He was originally holding her, so he pressed her heavily against his chest. "Hey, slow down. The soup is going to spill." Feng Ling quickly steadied her hand. Seeing that only a drop of soup flowed along the edge of the bowl and had not spilled out, she quickly struggled out of his arms and wiped the edge of the bowl with a piece of paper. When she turned to look at him, she saw that Li Nanheng had no intention of telling her those things at all. She stared at him and thought of how this man had tortured her in bed last night. She really loved and hated him. In addition, the matter of the Feng family was entangled in her heart. In a moment of emotion, she suddenly opened her mouth and bit hard on his chin. The man was unmoved. When she bit hard, the man raised his uninjured hand to press the back of her head. He lowered his head and rubbed her lips back and forth patiently and gently. Then he used the tip of his tongue to open her lips. Feng Ling reluctantly opened her mouth, but in the end, the man gently pried it open. Then he bit her soft lips and kissed her deeper and deeper. At the end of the kiss, Feng Ling could feel the man's gentleness and pity from this kiss. She could also feel that he seemed to really know something. However, he knew her very well. If she didn't say it, he would never mention it. She had already been kissed so much that she couldn't help but put the bowl and her hand on the table by the side to prevent it from spilling. Seeing that her hand was empty, the man pinched her chin and kissed her for a long time. By the time Feng Ling noticed something, she lowered her head to see that she had unknowingly sat on his lap. Her hands were around his neck, and she took the initiative to respond. Although her response was shaky, the lower part of her body was pressed tightly against his. The man had clearly, cough, "You're so injured, but you can still." She really couldn't say the words, "get hard." Just the first few words were said while panting. When she said it, she even tried to make her expression not look so shy. Chapter 12-14. It's my hand that's injured. It's my head, not here. As the man spoke, he pressed her with his uninjured hand and even straightened his hips. Fong Ling, she hurriedly tried to get down from the man's body, but the man refused to let go. "I know you're tired." "No, I just want to hug you." Li Nanheng didn't want to say that he just wanted to hug the 5-year-old little girl in her soul who was in a daze in the jungle. As he spoke, he hugged her tighter, rubbed the tip of his nose against her white and tender cheeks, and kissed the little dimples on her lips from time to time. There was a small dimple on one side of Fong Ling's mouth, which was not very obvious. She didn't usually like to smile, so it was even more difficult to see, but as long as she smiled, he would see a very shallow little dimple, which added a rare trace of playfulness to her originally cold and noble face. "Your skin is already so good. In the future, you don't need to use those messy skincare products on your face like those women. Now it's smooth and tender. I can see that you don't like to use those things either." "Really? More importantly, beauty is in my heart. Not to mention that you're already very beautiful right now, even after 10, 20, or 30 years, I still won't get tired of looking at your face. I'll still hold it in my heart and love it, because you're not someone else. You're Fong Ling." The man's kiss gently swept past her dimples and landed on the corner of her lips. He said softly, "So, no matter if you are in the base or face your future with any other identity, you will always be you and will not change. I will always stand in front of you and will not leave. You don't have to be afraid of anything and don't let your imagination run wild." Fong Ling's expression changed a little. She nodded seriously. In the evening, the two of them did not return to the base. Even if they returned, it would probably be tomorrow morning. In the middle of the night, Nanheng seemed to have a low fever. Fong Ling had heard from Xiao Su in the base that Boss Li rarely got sick in the base, and his physical fitness was definitely top 100. However, after falling into the ice lake at Rogers Pass and having a fever for several days and nights, although Boss still rarely got sick, as long as he had a fever, even if it was only a low fever of about 37.5 degrees, he would still be affected. Especially the last few times Boss Li was injured in the hospital, the most serious was his high fever. Fong Ling borrowed a thermometer from the hotel. After taking it, she saw that it was 37.8 degrees. The fever was not serious. Perhaps the wound on his wrist was stimulated by some of the gas released when the airbag broke. Even though it had been treated, there was still some infection. This temperature was indeed not high, but Li Nanheng did breathe heavily when he was asleep. He should not be very comfortable. He woke up after a while and said that he was a little thirsty. Fong Ling rushed to pour water for him. She had specially boiled the water so that he could drink more hot water. The water was still very hot. She came back with the cup in her hands. It was so hot that she raised one hand to touch her ear from time to time. She swapped hands to touch her ears and quickly walked back to the bed. She blew the water by the bed for a while. Li Nanheng was not in a good state, but when he heard her hissing as she blew the water, he frowned. Fearing that she was scalded, he supported his body with one hand on the bed. Fong Ling knelt on one knee by the bed and fed the water to his mouth. Li Nanheng was about to say something to her, but the water was no longer so hot. He paused and didn't say anything in the end. He drank up the glass of water. "Do you want more?" Fong Ling took out a tissue to wipe the water leaking from the corner of his mouth. Li Nanheng's mouth was a little dry just now, but after being moistened, it was not as pale as before. "Enough." The man's voice was slightly hoarse. Obviously, he did not realize that he was having a fever. "Sleep early. I'm fine." With that, he closed his eyes. He probably hadn't woken up yet. Feng Ling went to put the cup away and then pressed her slightly cold hand against his forehead. The man closed his eyes and was half asleep. However, feeling the coolness of her hand, he leaned in her direction comfortably. He suddenly turned over, hugged her tightly with both hands, and pressed her down with his legs. Lie down. Don't press your hands. Feng Ling reminded him. She felt that she was leaning against a stove. It was not even 38 degrees, but such a hug still made her feel that this man was as hot as a stove. Li Nanheng did not move. It seemed that he had fallen asleep again. Feng Ling wanted to push him, but she saw that he seemed to be sleeping very peacefully and did not subconsciously frown because of the fever. She did not sleep well last night and had been taking care of him in the afternoon. She was indeed very tired and sleepy. If it weren't for his fever, she would have already laid down beside him and slept for a while. Just sleep like this. Li Nanheng seemed to have fallen asleep, but he suddenly said this. Then he pressed her into his arms and told her to sleep immediately. Feng Ling did not break free. Although the man's body was very hot, his body was still unique to her. Especially when this man left so many marks on her body yesterday. After being kissed and hugged by him for an entire night, she became more and more sensitive to the smell of his body. Now that she was leaning against him, she felt that all the hair on her body stood up and her blood was about to boil. Be good. I don't need to take medicine for a low fever. I know my own body well. I'll be fine tomorrow morning, the man said again, successfully suppressing the worry in Feng Ling's heart. It was indeed not serious, but she was afraid that he would be too uncomfortable. After all, he still had a concussion. However, the man's voice was low and gentle. The temperature of his body was so hot that it made her sleepy. After a while, she closed her eyes. This night, she slept very peacefully. Feng Ling knew that if Li Nanheng hadn't needed to rest last night, he would definitely have done something to her if he had stayed in the hotel for another night. She remembered that when she didn't know what time she slept last night, the man might have woken up halfway. He held her and kissed her forehead and the tip of her nose for a long time. In the end, he kissed her mouth. Although his lower body was clearly pressed against her valiantly, he did not continue to do anything but just held her in his arms. Feeling that he probably did not want to do anything, she continued to sleep after being kissed awake. She slept until the morning. The sky was still dark and she had to return to the base. Li Nanheng's fever had indeed subsided when he woke up in the morning. The symptoms of his concussion were not as serious as yesterday. He did not say that he had a headache. Except for the obvious gauze on his hand, he did not look like he had been injured. After waking up, he asked her if she wanted to stay outside for a few more days or return to the base. Chapter 12-15. The newbies of Team 1 were still waiting for her to go back for morning training. Since Li Nanheng was fine, of course she would choose to go back. After all, even if Li Nanheng asked her to be more casual, she thought that she could return to the base now and obtain the identity of an instructor for the newbies. This was a smooth road that Li Nanheng had planned for her. She had to remember her responsibilities and not be too willful and rash. Since she had taken over those newbies, she had to be responsible to the end. However, although he had returned to the base, Li Nanheng received a call and learned that there was a business banquet in Los Angeles in the evening that Li Nanheng needed to attend on behalf of the Li Corporation. Feng Ling saw that he was fine except for his hand injury, and he represented the Li Corporation, so she couldn't interrupt him. She only told him not to touch the water and didn't say much. However, Li Nanheng took the opportunity to ask her to go to the banquet with him tonight when she walked out of the training ground. Feng Ling was about to say no, but he said that Jin Wan would also go tonight with him. Hearing Jin Wan, Feng Ling wavered. Originally, she wanted to stay in the base to teach the few people in her team who were a little slow in training and couldn't keep up with the physical training movements, but she hadn't seen Jin Wan for many days since she came back. She didn't know how Jin Wan was living in the Mo family in Los Angeles recently. She must be very happy with Mr. Mo every day. Fong Ling also missed her. For Jean Wan's sake, she agreed to go to the banquet. After deciding on this matter, Fong Ling turned to return to the training ground. When she looked back, she saw that a few newbies seemed to want to sneak out to rest while she was away, but they didn't expect her to be outside the door. She looked back and saw the two of them. Fong Ling's expression turned cold and she stared at them like a knife. The two of them. They almost knelt down. In the end, Fong Ling kicked them back to the training ground with a cold face and punished them to do 300 push-ups on the spot. In the end, the two of them were so tired that they lay on the ground like dead dogs and could not move. In the next hour, the news that Fong Ling and the deputy drill master were chatting intimately outside the training ground suddenly spread in their team. Everyone suspected that the deputy drill master fawned on drill master Fong because of his looks. How could drill master Fong be so easily won over by a man? How could she fall in love? She must not fall in love. The deputy drill master must be chasing after her. The group of people trained and brainwashed themselves, but Fong Ling stood calmly in front of the door and looked at each of them. Whoever made a wrong move, she casually threw a stone at the numbing acupoint on the other party's arm. In an instant, the other party stood up straight and did not dare to be careless at all. Noon, base cafeteria. Fong Ling was eating. Since Wan Ku was warned, he didn't continue to show his existence around her, but Fong Ling actually didn't hate him, so she nodded to him when she saw him. However, at this moment, several other boys who were not afraid of death sat by her side with plates and asked her questions from time to time. At first, Fong Ling answered a few words, but later, these people asked her why she suddenly put on a high-collared shirt. Although it snowed yesterday, it was very warm to wear a uniform in the base. She didn't need to wear too thick clothes, but she even wore a high-collared shirt. They even asked her if she was afraid of the cold. Fong Ling calmly touched her collar, lest the bite marks left by a certain bastard would be seen. If they were seen, she really wouldn't have the face to pretend to be aloof in front of this group of newcomers and think of a way to suppress them. Well, I'm afraid of the cold, she explained coldly and then frowned. Are you all very free? Why are you all surrounding me? Why are you all surrounding me? I've been worried about you on the training ground all morning. Can't you leave me alone for a while at noon? Seeing that she was about to lose her temper, they quickly retreated from the scene. They had wanted to ask a few questions about her and the deputy drill master, but in the end, they found that they didn't have a chance to ask. Because Fong Ling was almost murdered in the hotel, Li Nanheng still needed to personally investigate the situation. He had to investigate all aspects, including the bank. So he didn't come to train these newbies this morning. Fong Ling thought that he would go out with him to attend a banquet in the evening and she would train them by herself in the afternoon. In the end, when she was finally able to have a quiet meal alone, a certain deputy drill master appeared in front of her. Seeing that the man did not eat and only took a cup of coffee to sit down, she raised her eyes to look at him. At the same time, she suddenly felt that the newcomers were quietly looking at her from all directions. They were curious about who the deputy drill master was and wanted to know if there was anything fishy between the deputy drill master and her. Fong Ling retracted her gaze, only to see that the man was looking at her calmly as if there was no one else around him. She glanced at the coffee cup in his hand and whispered, "You just had a fever last night. Why are you drinking coffee today? Do you think I'm sick?" "It's just a minor headache and fever, but I've already recovered in the morning." The man picked up the cup and took a sip. Obviously, he had long sensed the gazes around him, but he had always been calmer than Fong Ling in such matters. He did not show any change in his emotions and continued to drink his coffee without being affected in the slightest. It seemed as though everyone's gaze had nothing to do with him. "You don't come to the base cafeteria to eat. Why are you sitting here?" Fong Ling whispered to remind him to behave in front of the newbies. The man just glanced at her and said indifferently, "After many investigations and bank records, we have found the person who transferred the money to the SUV driver." "Who is it?" Fong Ling paused and looked up at him. Li Nanheng looked at her silently for a moment as if some deeper truth was about to be revealed. In fact, Feng Ling also knew that if it was really Feng Mingzhu, it meant that she was really a member of the Feng family. Otherwise, Feng Mingzhu would just be jealous and wouldn't bribe someone to kill her. If it was really her, she didn't even need to ask. Everything would be clear. Li Nanheng's slender fingers slowly rubbed the wall of the cup. He said, Feng Mingzhu. The plot has already begun to advance at full speed. Dear friends, after watching for so long, you should be able to see that the various torture scenes you thought were actually not torture. There are no terrible torture scenes, so you don't have to worry too much about any disgusting scenes happening in the later stage. Of course, it's necessary to have both sweetness and torture, but it will definitely be very exciting. Sweetheart, I suggest throwing monthly votes at Qingqing's head. Chapter 12:16. When the truth came, Feng Ling found that she was much calmer than she had imagined. Li Nanheng didn't hesitate for a moment. Obviously, he had already seen that she was prepared. Feng Ling was silent for a long time and didn't say anything. She lowered her head and ate a few more mouthfuls. After saying that name, Li Nanheng didn't speak again, nor did he drink any more coffee. He just looked at her patiently. After eating a few more mouthfuls, she put down her chopsticks and said in a low voice, I saw Mrs. Feng a while ago. She said that Feng Mingzhu went abroad with her friends to relax. Relaxing doesn't mean living outside for a long time. She came back long ago. That's right. She had never thought about Feng Mingzhu's matter. She had a vague idea of many things, but at this moment, she was clearer than ever. After a moment of silence, she looked up at him. What do you know? Li Nanheng's eyes were indifferent, but there was some patience and gentleness that only she could see. I know what you know and what you don't know. Feng Ling, so? Now perhaps it was time to uncover the truth, such as the blood relationship between her and the Feng family that had been tested by DNA, and the cenotaph he married 3 years ago was her. But right now, all of Feng Ling's thoughts and energy were occupied by the work of the youth team. She was too responsible for these team members, and all of a sudden, everything fell on her head. No matter how strong her heart was, she wouldn't be able to digest it so easily. After the assessment of the newcomer team next week, when everything is settled, I'll show you something. Li Nanheng tapped his fingers on the coffee cup and looked straight into her eyes. Focus on what you're doing first. Don't think too much. This kind of petty scheme can't hurt you at all. As long as you're vigilant enough, that kind of young lady who has been raised in a boudoir is no match for you at all. But you're injured. Li Nanheng sneered, leaned his upper body against the table, and leaned forward toward her. Although he didn't lean too close, his sudden move still attracted the attention and curious gazes of the newcomers in the cafeteria. He ignored the gazes around him and looked at her. Does your heart ache? Feng Ling sat there without moving. I was very distressed at that time. I didn't hide it. Li Nanheng smiled in satisfaction, but he said, it's my fault. At that time, I saw that the car was about to collide with us, so I was impulsive. Otherwise, why would I hurt myself when I could have solved the problem with one shot? However, at that time, there was a car between them, and it was useless to shoot. Even if they managed to burst the car's tires, the car would still be able to kill Feng Ling with its inertia. Thus, it was useless to shoot at that time unless they used the front of their car to crash into it head-on. Fortunately, Li Nanheng's injury was not serious. He only had a slight cut on his hand and a shock, but it was not a big problem. He would recover in a few days. Feng Ling suddenly turned to look at the people around her, only to see that the newcomers were looking at her and Li Nanheng with curiosity and gossip in their eyes. It seemed that they had finally confirmed that there was definitely something going on between her and this deputy drill master whose identity she didn't know. She suddenly retracted her gaze and looked at him. If you're done, you can go now. When Li Nanheng heard this, he immediately raised his eyebrows coldly. You want me to let you go after using you? Isn't she the one who cried and called me husband that night? Feng Ling, Li Nanheng's voice was not loud, and no one else dared to sit at this table, so of course no one else could hear him. However, the effect of this sentence still caused Feng Ling's spine to heat up. She couldn't believe it but seemed to have some impression of it. When did I ever call you that? The little woman had been oppressed by him on the bed for a long time, and in the end, her voice was hoarse from shouting. After being stimulated several times, she became extremely obedient in the end. He coaxed her into saying whatever he wanted her to say. At that time, she was really forced to call him hubby a few times. She even called him Big Brother Nanheng several times with a face full of shame and embarrassment. Pretending to have amnesia. Are you going to rest outside after the banquet tonight to help Zhang Nian recall her memories? Feng Ling. You just had a concussion yesterday. You're really worthy of the word beast. My own woman moves around in front of me every day, especially in the base. I can see her but can't touch her. I've been holding it in for so long. After leaving the base, it's better to be a beast than a beast. Feng Ling couldn't win against him, so she simply ignored him and warned him not to get too close to her in front of so many newcomers. Li Nanheng looked at the high-collared shirt she was wearing and smiled. He didn't go too far and followed her instructions. Night. Los Angeles, a business dinner party. Feng Ling didn't want to change her clothes. Anyway, she just thought she was Li Nanheng's attendant or bodyguard. She certainly wouldn't appear in such a place in a gown like other women. Li Nanheng let her be. He represented the Li Corporation tonight, not 11 base, so he changed into a suit, so as not to be disrespectful to the organizer. As for Feng Ling, he would let her wear the uniform if she wanted to. He didn't want others to see her amazing side. It was enough for her to stay quietly by his side. That night, Jin Wan did go with Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan's injury in Cambodia had already healed a lot. Recently, the couple had been staying at the Mo family in Los Angeles. Feng Ling didn't know much about the situation there, but she heard that Chairman Mo had to accept Jin Wan due to Mo Jingshan's pressure, and Mrs. Mo, Ms. Wan Zhu, liked Jin Wan very much, so they got along well. Seeing the pregnant Jin Wan appear in the banquet hall with Mo Jingshan with a red face and bright eyes, Feng Ling knew that she was in a good mood recently and everything was fine. While Li Nanheng was talking with others, Feng Ling took the time to say hello to Jin Wan. After a while, she was taken away by Li Nanheng. As they chatted, she was pushed into a corner of the banquet hall by this man who couldn't help being horny as long as he left the base. He pressed her against the wall and lowered his head to whisper in her ear all kinds of embarrassing words that made her so angry that she bit him twice. However, there was an important call on Li Nanheng's cell phone. The banquet hall was too noisy, so he turned to answer the call. Only then did she catch her breath. She looked around the banquet hall and suddenly found that Jin Wan had disappeared. Chapter 12-17. Feng Ling's eyelids twitched. She had been with Jin Wan for a long time and had instinctively sensed the danger around Jin Wan. Suddenly, she heard a scream from the direction of the bathroom. The scream didn't sound like Jin Wan, but the scream was drowned out by the lively banquet hall. Only Feng Ling, who had just walked to the bathroom, could hear it clearly. She walked quickly to the bathroom and was about to push it open, only to find that the door was locked from the inside. Mrs. Mo? Is she inside? Feng Ling frowned, leaned against the door and asked, Jin Wan? It was quiet inside, and no one answered. Even the person who screamed just now was silent. She suddenly raised her foot and kicked the door hard, and the loud crash shocked everyone in the banquet hall. As the bathroom door lock was broken, Feng Ling quickly pushed the door open and searched inside with her sharp eyes, only to find that there was no one in the bathroom. The scream just now was not Jin Wan, but the things scattered on the floor of the bathroom were Jin Wan's. Jin Wan and Su Shui were both taken away at this banquet. However, the most unexpected thing was that Mr. Mo, who had always planned everything, was finally in a passive position in this disaster. Worried about Jin Wan's safety because she was pregnant, he searched for Jin Wan overnight. It was not until dawn that he finally found some clues and learned the purpose of the person who instructed them to kill Jin Wan and Su Shui. Ignoring the wound on his back that had not fully recovered, Mr. Mo drove directly to a certain highway in Los Angeles. A few people from 11 Base arrived, and everyone drove to the highway, intending to attack from all sides. However, there was only one highway, and there was no way to get to the highway in a short distance, so they could only chase after them. If Fong Ling could predict the result in advance, she would rather have been the one rushing to the front of the truck than to see Mr. Mo covered in blood and unconscious in the deformed car, or to see the pool of blood flowing out of Jin Wan's lower body. At that time, their car was following closely behind, and as they chased, they found that the speeding giant truck had been chasing in the direction of the car where Jin Wan and Su Shui were kidnapped. In Li Nanheng's car, Fong Ling sat on the passenger seat and stared in that direction with a frown. Li Nanheng saw that the car was filled with killing intent earlier than her. He did not bat an eyelid but sped up. However, Li Nanheng's hand had just been injured and was wrapped in gauze, so he could not control the steering wheel as flexibly as usual. Just when Li Nanheng couldn't stop the tragedy from happening, Mr. Mo's black Bentley suddenly rushed forward at a terrifying speed. At that time, Fong Ling had a deep impression of him. She suddenly heard Li Nanheng say hoarsely, "Fong Ling, close your eyes." However, before he finished speaking, the two cars collided, and the huge shock shook the entire highway. Fong Ling clearly felt that Li Nanheng was so angry that he almost lost control of the car. She quickly rushed forward with a stiff face, only to see that the black Bentley had been smashed into a horrible and strange shape. Mr. Mo must be dead. Li Nanheng's eyes turned red. He immediately took off the gauze on his wrist, threw it at his feet, and jumped out of the car to solve the situation. Fong Ling's mind went blank. She looked at the Bentley and suddenly turned to look at Jin Wan, who had fallen on the highway, and hurriedly got out of the car to help her up. She couldn't forget Jin Wan's heart-wrenching cries at that time. She couldn't forget the gasoline flowing out of the black Bentley mixed with the scarlet blood. She couldn't forget the blood flowing out of Jin Wan's lower body before she fainted. She couldn't forget the scene when Li Nanheng pulled out a gun and pointed it at the driver in the giant truck with red eyes, wanting to shoot hundreds of holes in his body, but Kay and the others held him tightly and stopped him. The truth hadn't been found out. Even if the people of 11 Base had the right to hold guns, even if Mr. Mo was in the other car, even if everyone wanted to blow up that car, everyone knew that if Li Nanheng really shot at that time, 11 Base and Li Nanheng would be implicated, so they wouldn't be able to help Mr. Mo at all and would only make the whole thing more complicated. Li Nanheng knew the seriousness of the whole thing better than anyone else, but Kay and the others could see that Boss Li was really angry. He almost shot, but several brothers stepped forward to stop him, grabbed his wrist, and pressed his hand hard to stop him from shooting. After a few seconds of silence, Li Nanheng came to his senses at a speed beyond anyone's imagination. He coldly ordered everyone to sort out the evidence at the scene, pry open the Bentley door, and find a way to rescue Mr. Mo. Fong Ling couldn't go there to help now. Jin Wan, who had fainted because of the great sadness, fear, and miscarriage, was enough to make her heart ache. After taking Jin Wan into the car, she looked in the rearview mirror at the Bentley that the brothers of 11 Base had pried open and at Mr. Mo's body, which was carefully carried out of the car. There was blood everywhere, blood. Seeing this, Fong Ling's heart ached and she drove Jin Wan to the hospital first. This incident caused a stir in the lives of Mr. and Mrs. Mo and shocked the Mo family in Los Angeles. When Director Mo and Ms. Wanzhou arrived at the hospital, Jin Wan had just had an abortion and was still unconscious. Mr. Mo was still in emergency treatment, and his condition was unknown. In the short time of watching over Jin Wan in the hospital, Fong Ling's heart sank to the bottom. She couldn't accept that such a thing would suddenly happen to Mr. and Mrs. Mo, who were so happy and loving. Mr. Mo couldn't die. Otherwise, how could Jin Wan live? But the only thing Fong Ling could do now was to go to the hospital to accompany Jin Wan when she had time. After all, this was Los Angeles, and Director Mo and Ms. Wanzhou were in the hospital every day. She couldn't make any decisions for Jin Wan and Mr. Mo, especially when Ms. Wanzhou sat in Jean Wan's ward and kept holding back her tears. Feng Ling could do nothing but stand quietly and watch. In the face of life and death, people were really too small. Sometimes, Feng Ling thought of Su Shui, who died on the highway, thought of Su Zhilan, and thought of the scene when Mr. Mo's Bentley was hit on the highway. Sometimes, she thought of the SUV that rushed straight at her in the underground parking lot of the hotel that day. She couldn't understand. If she was really the daughter of the Feng family, no matter how dissatisfied Feng Mingzhu was with her, she was still her biological sister. How could her biological sister want to kill her? Chapter 12:18. She couldn't figure out many things related to life and human nature, which lingered in her heart and made her suffer from insomnia several times. So after staying in the hospital for 3 days and suffering from insomnia, she finally sat down on the bench in the hospital corridor and fell asleep with her eyes closed. When she woke up, she found that she had been sent back to 11 base and was lying in her own room upstairs in the base hall. She closed her eyes, thinking that she had just had a nightmare, but then Kay called her. "Feng Ling, you've been in the hospital for 3 days. Boss asked me to send you back to rest. The newcomers are going to take the assessment soon. Don't come to the hospital for the next few days." Kay said, "There's no need to stay in the hospital like this. Jean Wan's miscarriage has become a fact, and Mr. Mo is not out of danger yet. Our brothers and the people of Shine Group are here. Don't worry, we can help you. You will collapse if you stay like this. Boss is busy dealing with the affairs of the Mo family and the Su family, as well as the murderer. He can't find time to go back these 2 days. Stay in the base and don't let us worry about you." Of course, Feng Ling knew that it was useless for her to stay in Jean Wan's ward, but when she saw Jean Wan sitting silently on the bed after waking up, looking very calm and not crying, she felt even more uncomfortable. But it was true that the brothers of the base had all been there. Li Nanheng had seen this with his own eyes, and it was about Mr. Mo. He couldn't stand by and let the whole thing be handled by various parties. Even if she went there, Jean Wan wouldn't talk to anyone. She just stood by. In the face of life and death, nothing mattered. Feng Ling was under a lot of pressure. After hanging up the phone, she lay on the bed, thinking that she couldn't fall asleep, but she was really too tired these days. She thought about what happened to Jean Wan in the past few days and the scenes on the highway that day, and finally fell asleep. When she woke up in the afternoon, she was in a much better state of mind. She went out of the room and met Ah Feng downstairs. Ah Feng gave her an understanding look. "I know you have a good relationship with Mrs. Mo. Now that something happened to Mr. Mo and Mrs. Mo, you can't calm down for a while. I can understand. If you really don't have the energy to continue teaching, I can send someone else to teach you, but don't go back to the hospital. Boss specifically told me not to leave the base, to eat and rest on time, and not to stay up night after night. It's okay. I'm much better after a day's rest. I'll call the hospital in the evening. Tomorrow morning training will be carried out as usual, and the assessment will be held soon. I have to live up to the efforts of the newcomers," Feng Ling said softly. Ah Feng nodded. "If you think you can adjust your mood and state well, of course, no one can replace your position in the hearts of the members. Since it has happened, we can only solve it. The brothers in the base are used to life and death. I believe they can adjust their state well." Feng Ling didn't speak anymore but walked out in silence, sitting on the stone bench outside the base hall for an afternoon and an evening. The next day, when it was time for morning training, the members of Team 1, who had been training by themselves for 3 days, were surprised to find that Drillmaster Feng Ling, who had been missing for 3 days, had come back and was waiting for them in the training ground as early as before. The group of newcomers hurried into the training ground for morning training. However, because Feng Ling was not around in the past few days, a few bad-tempered people who liked to say angry words said that the assessment was coming soon. A few days ago, the 2 drill masters were not around, and they thought that their team had been abandoned, causing the atmosphere and the entire team to be a little gloomy. It was as though they were really going to be abandoned. Even when they were training, they could not give them any energy. Looking at their state, Feng Ling narrowed her eyes coldly. Mo Jingshan was not out of danger yet. Tubes of various colors were inserted all over his body, and he was surrounded by medical equipment. In the enclosed ICU, even the glass windows outside the ward were not allowed to enter. Every day, there was only 1 or 2 hours when they could see the people inside through the glass windows. All the top doctors in the world were gathered here, trying to save people, but the waiting time was the longest. Whether he could survive or not depended on whether he could hold on to his last breath or not. In the next few days, Feng Ling stayed in the ward for a few days, and Li Nanheng almost didn't sleep. He ran around and was worried about the hospital. The accident made almost all his acquaintances lose a lot of weight, especially Jean Wan, who had just had a miscarriage. Everyone was worried that she would take things too hard, but they found that she seemed to be calmer than everyone else and didn't need anyone to worry about her at all. In the face of such a major accident, she was so sensible that it made people's hearts ache. He looked at Mo Jingshan outside the ICU again. When he came out again, Li Nanheng pinched between his eyebrows, and Kay came over. "Boss, just now the base called and said that Feng Ling has returned to the youth training team. His mental state seems to have returned to normal, but the ignorant members of the youth training team often speak with dissatisfaction and are very negative. They feel that they may not be able to get good results in this newcomer assessment." Speaking of this, Kay continued angrily, "It's really a waste of Feng Ling's effort to teach them. She gets up earlier than them and sleeps later than them every day. It's just that she stayed in the hospital for 3 days and couldn't go back. In the end, they all became ingrates." Damn, listening to this, Li Nanheng walked to the smoking room at the end of the hospital corridor, lit a cigarette and put it in his mouth. With the strength of the cigarette, he recovered a little, looked down at the time, and said, "How many days before the newcomer assessment?" 4 days. On Sunday. A puff of white smoke came out of the man's mouth. "Since she has the ability to teach 20 disobedient boys a lesson, she will be able to teach them a lesson again. Don't worry, she has her own way of doing things. I know Feng Ling is fine, but isn't she still worried about Jean Wan? I'm afraid she'll be under too much pressure. If she's really bullied by those insensible brats, my heart will ache." As soon as Kay said this, he suddenly paused. Seeing Boss Lee squinting at him meaningfully with a cigarette in his mouth, Kay hurriedly said with a strong desire to survive, "Well, it's because we are worried about each other." Li Nanheng sneered. "I know better than my own woman whether she can bear the burden on her shoulders or not. Don't worry about her and go to work. Okay." Chapter 12-19. Don't be depressed. Drill Master Feng Ling has repeatedly emphasized that our team's overall training performance and level are higher than that of Team 2. We will definitely get a good result in the assessment. Why are you still so suspicious? Although Drill Master Feng is indeed very good, very professional, very cool, and indeed very strict when she is strict, she is, after all, a woman. Recently, I often see her sitting there in a daze alone. Women are really too emotional. I don't know what she is thinking about. Anyway, it definitely has nothing to do with us. I think she just took the time to come back to brush us off. She doesn't care about us at all. That's right. That's right. That's right. All right, don't say such things. Have you forgotten that she was taken out to do devil training 2 days ago? Do you think she didn't hear you? She just doesn't want to argue with you. Be content. We usually practice well. Hey, look at her face today, it's very bad. I don't know if something happened to her, or if she's in love. That's why she looks so unstable, don't say that. Drill Master Feng Ling was fine a few days ago. I think she's not feeling well today. Women are so troublesome. They have all kinds of reasons every day. TSK, on the day of the rookie assessment, Li Nanheng finally rushed back from the hospital. In order not to affect the psychological state of these rookies or Feng Ling, he kept a low profile when he came back and didn't tell anyone. When the rookies began to compete with each other on the field, he found a place to sit beside the members of Team 1. But he heard a few people discussing in low voices around him. Han Jin, who was also sitting next to him, looked back at those people, frowned, and whispered in Li Nanheng's ear, "These unsatisfied brats. Feng Ling is a person who keeps things to herself. She is too worried about Mr. and Mrs. Mo, so it's impossible for her to explain to these rookies, so even if she misunderstood them, she didn't say anything. She still trained very responsibly every day. I don't know what these brats are thinking. Just because Feng Ling often sits there alone and doesn't say anything recently, they insist that Drillmaster Feng Ling is a woman, so she has too many things on her mind and doesn't have much time to train them. The overall condition of this team is good, but after all, there are still a few troublemakers. Can't they see that Feng Ling gets up earlier than them every day and sleeps later than them? Or can't they see that every time they train, she is very responsible for adjusting their postures for them one by one? When she has a little private time, she will be alone for a while, or take time to call Jin Wan and feel sorry for her for a while. How can it be considered unprofessional? She is a woman, so it's wrong? Damn, if I were the referee this time, I would ***king kick all these ignorant brats out of the base. None of them can officially enter the base. A group of idiots who don't understand human language. Li Nanheng sat quietly on the steps next to the team members, looking at the direction where Feng Ling stood, and did not speak. A few of the team members saw him, but they had always been a little afraid of this deputy drill master who could make them vomit blood as soon as he appeared, so they didn't dare to talk anymore. When they passed by him, they nodded to him awkwardly and then quickly walked away in front of him. Xiao Su also came over. Feng was presiding over the assessment in the field and couldn't come over. When he approached, he asked in a low voice, "Boss, don't you plan to go to the front for the assessment? They still don't know that you are back, and Feng Ling is still in the front. How is the hospital? Mr. Mo sitting here can more intuitively see more of the real side," Li Nanheng said lazily. Mo Jingshan is out of danger, but he hasn't woken up yet. Xiao Su sighed. Anyway, it's good that he is out of danger, which means that he is one step closer to waking up. During the intermission of the assessment, Feng Ling disappeared. Li Nanheng took a look at the time and got up to go to the bathroom. When he passed by the women's bathroom specially set up for Feng Ling, he heard footsteps inside. Considering that it was now the assessment period, she didn't have the energy to deal with too many things. Seeing that he was back, she would definitely ask more about Mo Jingshan and Jin Wan, so he didn't show up but went to the men's bathroom and stood for a while. When Li Nanheng turned into the bathroom, Feng Ling happened to come out from the opposite side. She seemed to be in a good state of mind. She was dressed in a black battle uniform. The design of the uniform for the past 2 years was a little tight, showing off her figure. Wearing it on her body, she had curves in all the right places. Amidst the coldness and elegance, there was a unique sense of sexiness hidden under her clothes. Feng Ling, who was usually serious in the base, was the only one who knew how perfect and sexy her figure was after taking off her clothes. Feng Ling seemed to have just washed her face in the bathroom, and her chin was still dripping with water. She wiped it with a paper and walked out, holding a small pack of sanitary napkins in her hand, which she put into a pocket as she walked. No wonder her condition was fine, but her complexion was so pale. No wonder the troublemaker in the youth training team said that she didn't look well today. She should be on her period. The things she experienced in the past few days and the psychological pressure made her period a little heavier this time. She was obviously very uncomfortable. Sure enough, when Feng Ling was about to walk out of the bathroom, she suddenly stopped, raised her hand to her stomach, and stood there for a long time. Seeing that she had a stomachache, Li Nanheng came out of the bathroom and went over to support her arm. "If you're not feeling well, go back to rest. I'll watch them in the second half." Fong Ling was startled by the person who suddenly appeared next to her and turned her head sharply. When she saw it was Li Nanheng, she was even more surprised. "Aren't you in the hospital? When did you come back? You've worked so hard to train such a team." It wasn't easy for them to survive until the day of the assessment. "Of course, I'll come back at such an important time." Li Nanheng looked at her hand that was moving away from her stomach. "Period?" Fong Ling nodded. "I'll send you back to rest." "No need." Fong Ling quickly stood firm and didn't let him help her walk. There was no one near the bathroom. She took a deep breath to relieve the discomfort in her abdomen and then said, "Just now, I felt that someone was looking at me in the men's bathroom. I thought you couldn't come back because there were too many things in the hospital. I thought someone in the base saw me and hid inside. I didn't expect it to be you." "Surprised?" the man asked with a smile. Chapter 12:20. Are you surprised? The man asked with a smile. Of course she was surprised. She had been in a bad mood these days and Li Nanheng had not returned to the base. Now that she suddenly saw him back, she was definitely surprised and happy. However, in the first half of the assessment results of her subordinates were not ideal. Although they could win some points in the afternoon, Fong Ling was really worried about the newcomers on the field and couldn't care too much about her personal feelings. Li Nanheng recalled what he had heard from the training team and felt as if someone had stabbed his heart twice. Fong Ling was unwilling to return to the base because of her gender. She was afraid that all her efforts would not be understood in the eyes of others. In the end, this group of brothers in the base was too familiar with her and basically did not have any negative comments, but she did not expect a group of ignorant newcomers to be so arrogant. All her hard work and efforts in the past month seemed to have become wrong because she was a woman and because she was in a bad mood recently. The point was why this woman kept everything to herself. She was clearly in a bad mood, but she still smiled at him and did not even complain about her grievances. Now that she saw that he had finally come back, shouldn't she hug him immediately, crying for her husband and asking him to help her teach those ignorant brats a lesson? But she just didn't say it. Fong Ling still remembered that he said that after the assessment was over, he would show her something. She could roughly guess what it was, but now she was not in the mood to think about it. Hearing the gunshot from the training ground indicating that the second half was about to begin, she hurriedly walked out. Li Nanheng did not stop her. He knew very well how serious his woman was. If she said she didn't need to rest, he couldn't stop her. The second half of the assessment had not begun yet, and they had only entered the preparation process. In fact, the overall strength of the first team led by Fong Ling was really good. However, in recent days, a 17-year-old boy named Verum had been caught by her slacking off several times and was dragged out to train by her alone. One time, he lay on the training ground and did not move. Fong Ling just looked at him coldly and told him to get up. Perhaps people's acceptance was different. Back then, Li Nanheng treated her mercilessly, so he honed her into a sharp sword. However, this child named Verum was different. He only felt that he was being targeted and hated her. He often talked to several newcomers in the team in private. As for what they talked about, she roughly knew a little. They were just nitpicking on her, but it was not appropriate for them to say anything to her face, so she could only say something in secret. The assessment was about to begin, so Fong Ling did not pay much attention to him. However, because she had seen the results of the newcomers in the first half, it was obvious that they were not at their normal level. At this time, if they thought that they were not the one to be valued, they did not go all out during the assessment, or even held back, they would definitely lose. Especially Verum, who had been secretly affecting the mood of the team members recently. The second half began. There were a total of 10 rounds of sparring in the second half. They were all competing on the physical fitness and movement standards of the newcomers who had just been trained for a month, as well as their proficiency in many coherent gun-holding movements. In short, it was more crucial than the first half and scored the highest. However, after 4 consecutive matches, the average score of the first team had always been at a disadvantage. Of course, the difference was not very big. They clearly had more room for improvement. During the assessment, only Varam's score was the lowest. He seemed to be taking revenge on Feng Ling for the devil training she had given him, as well as for Feng Ling's ruthlessness when training them. He knew that if the overall score of Team 1 couldn't increase, almost all the members of the team would be screened out. Only a few people could officially enter the base. If he was just talking nonsense in the team 2 days ago, now that he was deliberately lowering the score on the field, he was really doing it on purpose. Li Nanheng, who was watching the battle from afar, had already seen the situation in the field. He narrowed his eyes coldly. In fact, based on Feng Ling's training method, the people under her should be very outstanding. However, young men at this age were too arrogant. If they were unhappy, they would spend several times more energy to fight against one person. They could clearly let the whole team enter, but someone deliberately lowered the score and made Feng Ling's face ugly. This was the first time Feng Ling had led a team after returning to the base, and it was also the first time she had taken an assessment. If she lost at this time, even if she could bear it, she would not stay. In the middle of the second half, there was another 10 minutes of rest. Li Nanheng paid attention to Feng Ling's state the whole time. Feng Ling looked fine on the surface. From the beginning to the end, she could see the situation. She was not unhappy, but her eyes were still very cold. Right now, the second team was 20 points higher than the first team, and there were only 5 matches left. It was almost impossible for them to win, unless all 5 of their members could perfectly obtain full marks in the last 5 matches. Only then would they be able to turn the situation around and win by a narrow margin. However, looking at the situation, it was already not easy to persevere through the assessment. It would not be easy to obtain full marks in the last 5 matches. Li Nanheng went to the viewing room where Ah Feng and the others were. He pulled out the surveillance footage and looked at the person named Varam for a while. He asked coldly, "Where's Feng Ling?" Feng Ling asked Varam to go to the back to talk. Ah Feng knew that Li Nanheng could see the problem because of his identity as the boss of the base, but he couldn't be biased, so he didn't say anything. However, the boy's purpose was too obvious. "I don't think Feng Ling is too nervous. I don't know how she can negotiate with that Varam. That boy used to be the type who didn't listen to anyone outside. His personality is not easy to control." Li Nanheng sneered. "Those who can't accept it should get out of the base as soon as possible, wasting time dragging the other 19 people down. Only Feng Ling's temper can suppress it. If it were Han Jin, would he drag him to the back and beat him half to death before revoking his assessment right so that he can no longer go to the training ground?" Ah Feng nodded. "Feng Ling can't bear to do that. Otherwise, he would have been gone long ago. He's only 17 years old. After all, he's still a child." Li Nanheng said lightly, "He's not young anymore." Ah Feng recalled that Feng Ling had been very good at restraining her personality since she was 13 years old. She had never found any excuses to take any measures because of her young age. In contrast, 17 years old was indeed not young, but she was still so immature. Chapter 12:21. Li Nanheng went to the back and knew that Feng Ling was talking to Varam in the temporary lounge behind the spectator room. He wanted to knock on the door and enter, but then he remembered that Feng Ling was the main drill master of Team 1. Since he had handed this responsibility to her, he couldn't interfere with her decisions. As long as she didn't speak, she didn't need anyone's help for the time being. Li Nanheng leaned against the wall at the door of the lounge and casually lit a cigarette, only to hear the conversation inside. He glanced at the time. There were still 4 minutes left before the next round. "Varam, what do you want?" Feng Ling looked at Varam, who was still arrogant after being called in, and asked indifferently. Varam put his hands in the pockets of his black uniform and whispered, "What do you mean, what do I want?" Although my performance was average and I pulled down the score of the team, there were a few other people in Team 2 who dragged me down. This can only be said to be a problem of the drill master's strength. Even if I lose in the end, it has nothing to do with me. Feng Ling looked at him expressionlessly. Is this what you want after working hard in the base for an entire month? Verum paused and then glanced at her coldly. Even if I win in the end, only 10 of the 20 people can stay. You have to decide the 10 spots yourself. Will you keep me? Since I'm going to leave sooner or later, why should I work for others? If I lose, everyone will leave together. No one can stay. You want to stay? Of course. All right. Feng Ling nodded. As long as you perform as usual in the assessment, I'll keep you. Verum was startled. Although he was biased and unhappy with Feng Ling, he knew that she was a trustworthy and principled person. As long as she could say it, she could do it. It wasn't as simple as lying to him. Feng Ling continued, I'll explain it to Ah Feng and the others later. I can speak to the base hall. Such a simple matter is easy to resolve. If you want to stay, I can help you. She glanced at the time again. So, how do you want to play the next 6 rounds? Verum couldn't react. He felt that Feng Ling didn't say such a compromise because she was threatened, but he couldn't find any other reason. Let me ask you, since you want to stay, do you want to come up with a convincing result so that you can have a stable position in the base in the future? After all, people want to see your strength, not the quota that you won inexplicably. Feng Ling's expression remained indifferent, and there was not the slightest anger or impatience in her tone. She continued to speak calmly, but what I want to say is that you haven't personally experienced any actual combat mission. You haven't seen any of your brothers die tragically by your side. Do you know what the most solemn place in front of the base hall is? They were all the name tags of the base brothers who died in battle. Did you think that 11 base had nothing but reputation and money? This is the place closest to the gate of life and death. If you don't have enough strength, just taking a step out will mean death. Verum was speechless. Am I strict with you just because I don't want you to stay? In the end, you're the only one who benefits from physical training. When you're on a mission and you're under the enemy's gun or grenade, at least you have enough stamina and speed to avoid those fatal dangers. You still have a chance to fight back. If I rashly make you stay when I can't see your strength, what's the difference between that and the person in charge of the King of Hell forcing a person to stay and wait for death? Verum, Feng Ling took a deep breath. Did you feel from the beginning that the base didn't value you at all when they sent a female drill master over? Although all of you patiently followed the training, your hearts were always unbalanced. You won't be satisfied with whether I treat you too hard or too lightly, just because I'm a woman? Verum explained hoarsely, that's not it. Feng Ling said indifferently, that's because you're not confident in yourself. You're too sensitive and extreme. If it weren't for the fact that I saw your strength and knew that you could do better, why would I call you out to do devil training alone? Do you think I'm targeting you, or am I responsible for your life in the base in the future? Verum froze for a moment, his hands clenched into fists. In my team, everyone is the same, but giving up is the most shameful. If you feel that you have no hope, you'll drag everyone down with you. But I think we can get full marks in the next 5 matches. We can win, and you can stay with your strength. Feng Ling looked at him. You have to know that your departure doesn't affect me much. If you're angry with me, it's your own business whether you stay or leave. Don't make a decision that you regret because you're young, and don't let yourself have a chance to be trampled on by the enemy because of a moment of laziness. Verum looked at Feng Ling and did not speak for a long time. Feng Ling glanced at the time. The competition was about to start. She fell silent and was about to walk out. Verum suddenly said, I'm sorry. Feng Ling paused and looked back at him. Li Nanheng put out the cigarette butt and turned to walk out. His back view disappeared at the end of the corridor. He was too nervous about his little woman. When everyone stepped on the blade and knew the pain, it was the most appropriate time to provoke them. Drill Master Feng Ling didn't need to be comforted. She had been standing steadily. In the next few games, Verum was like a motor with a new battery, desperately charging forward. Wanku's strength could not be underestimated. The two of them cooperated very well, driving the other team members to win 4 full scores in a row. It was only in the last game that other team members were replaced, and in the end, they barely won 4 points. In total, Feng Ling's team won by 2 points. The gap was not big. It was said that the base would give extra points based on the performance of everyone on the training ground today. Although the number of spots was limited, all those who passed the test with their strength would be assessed again, which would allow them to win a few more spots with their strength. The base's actions pacified this batch of restless rookies and boosted their morale, as well as quelling all sorts of discussions. As for Feng Ling, at least it proved that her hard work this month was not in vain. The 20 people under her were all outstanding. As for the rest, it would be up to Chang Yuan to prove whether they could be even more outstanding. At this time, Feng came out of the viewing room and suddenly said with a smile, "Boss Li, after watching these rookies' wonderful competition, are you really not going to evaluate them personally?" The dozens of rookies in the field looked at everyone in the field in surprise and then looked around. Boss Li? Was the legendary boss of the base here? Where was he? Where was he? After coming to the base for so long, he hadn't seen Boss in person. Was he finally going to show up? A small transition. Love you guys, moi. Chapter 12:22. Boss Li, Boss Li. They were about to meet their idol. So excited. However, after looking for a long time, they did not see anyone. The group of people turned their heads to look in other directions. The 20 members of Team 1 were also looking around nervously, thinking that they actually had the chance to see Boss Li. Li Nanheng, who was sitting on the steps next to Team 1, raised his eyebrows indifferently and glanced at Ah Feng, who was deliberately stirring up trouble. Feng Ling also stood rooted to the ground, but her eyes were calm as she looked at the group of people from Team 1. As she was standing far away, she could see the gazes of Li Nanheng, who had been sitting there calmly and casually, at the same time. This day would come sooner or later. Today was indeed the most appropriate day. She just didn't know if the 20 idiots under her would be able to take this stimulation. After all, a few days ago, these people had cursed their boss behind his back. They secretly hated him for being too ruthless, too heavy-handed, and too cold. He didn't give them any face at all. Li Nanheng was still sitting there, as if he didn't want to steal the limelight from these newcomers today. Every few years, the base would have to change new blood. In the future, 11 base would only be stronger than the previous generation. From the deputy drill master of Team 1 and Team 2. At this moment, Feng turned his gaze to the man sitting on the stairs and said with a smile, "Boss Li, you seem to be reluctant to part with your identity as a deputy drill master, don't you? Why don't we continue to recruit a batch of newcomers for you to train after this batch of newcomers is over? That way, you won't have to hide your identity and be an assistant drill master." In order to prevent the two teams' newbies from being too unbalanced after their identities were exposed, Li Nanheng also took the time to appear a few times in Team 2. He was equivalent to the deputy drill master of the two teams. Before Ah Feng finished speaking, the eyes of the two teams of rookies instantly turned to the man sitting in the most inconspicuous position. Almost in an instant, everyone looked in Nanheng's direction. Their eyes were filled with shock, disbelief, fear, and tears of regret for their poor performance in front of Boss. There were also all kinds of strange gazes. Li Nanheng glanced at him coldly, got up, and walked down the stairs. When he was about to reach Ah Feng, he passed by Feng Ling intentionally or unintentionally. Of course, the seniors in the base knew that he did it on purpose, but the newbies didn't understand. When he passed by Feng Ling, he glanced at her, and Feng Ling also looked at him silently. Even if it was just a glance, he could see the joy and calmness in her heart at this moment. She was happy that her hard work paid off and she finally won. She was calm because the newbies of the two teams were all fresh blood that the base needed most in the future. Winning or losing was just a game. She wouldn't be proud of such a narrow victory. I've been in the hospital for a few days and just came back today. I'm sitting quietly in the crowd. Can't you let me have a good rest? Li Nanheng glanced at him unkindly before taking the microphone from Ah Feng's hand. Ah Feng chuckled. It's just a matter of a few words. Boss, 1 word from you is worth 10 words from us. You're better at boosting morale than me. Boosting morale? Li Nanheng sneered, picked up the microphone, and said expressionlessly, just a few seconds ago, the person in charge of the base hall, Feng, the second in command of 11 base, asked me to say a few words to boost morale. Morale? Do you have any? Ah Feng, everyone, although the results of today's assessment matches have come out, I don't want to comment on everyone's performance, nor do I want to recall those terrible assessment standards, especially the members of Team 2. They could have played a better advantage to fight, but they didn't even show 70% of their ability. Why? Do you think coming to 11 base is like playing house? Can you put on a formal uniform with just a few moves on this training ground? The whole field was silent. Including the drill masters and newcomers, there were nearly 100 people, but at this time, it was so quiet that even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. Li Nanheng's eyes coldly swept across the group of newcomers of the 2 teams who were still shocked and didn't dare to move or make a sound. I haven't been in the base recently, and I haven't been supervising the training of the members of the 2 teams. What I can't believe is that I've been out for so many days and finally took the time to come back today, but I didn't see anyone make progress. Instead, they regressed. If I were the referee today, let alone the 2 teams, you wouldn't even have a place. Do you know why 11 base is called 11 base? X represents perfection in sociology, but it means unknown in numbers. I means impregnable, unbreakable, and indestructible. Impregnable is the purpose of the base. Every member of the base must have the ability to stand on his own. This place is not a place where a coward can easily gain a foothold. But even if everyone strives to become stronger, they have to bear the responsibility. They will face unknown dangers in a certain mission at any time and any place. If there is even the slightest mistake or weakness in hand speed, it will give the enemy an opportunity to take advantage of, and they will die a graveless death. Why did you enter 11 base? Just because people who go out from here can gain a foothold in the sphere of influence of the military and the police? Or is it because the title of 11 base makes you look good? You are superior to others wherever you go? Or you just want to find a place to stay for a few years? Where do you think this is? A university? An overcrowded kindergarten? Or do you think the reputation of 11 base is just a rumor that a group of hooligans can easily stand here and be fooled? I don't have any encouraging words. I only have one thing to say. Open your eyes and see clearly what is the difference between this land and the outside world. Don't wait until you pay with your life and blood before you regret it. Those who have the ability, stay, and those who don't, get out. The audience was still silent, but no one looked dissatisfied, including Ah Feng, who originally wanted Boss Li to support them. At this moment, he no longer had a joking expression and stood aside solemnly. Feng Ling stood quietly and listened. Li Nanheng never spoiled anyone. Even though he said that he had been paying attention to her when she first entered the base, even though she was thinner than others, he had never been soft-hearted to her. If she wanted to stay in the base and wanted to live, she had to become stronger, so that the enemy would not have a chance to take advantage of her. What the base needed was brave new blood, not a few nameplates hanging in front of the base hall. What they needed were brothers who could fight bravely, not burdens who would die on the battlefield. Chapter 12:23. Those who have the ability to stay, and those who don't have the ability to scram. These words sounded simple, but they contained a strong deterrent and warning. Indeed, in order to establish a foothold in the base, in addition to the ability to fight, one also had to have the ability to withstand psychological pressure. Take Varam's method for example. If Li Nanheng were to deal with this matter, he would have kicked him out of the base before he made any movements. He would not have given him any chance to struggle at all. Although it seemed ruthless, in a place like 11 base, the word 11 was the dividing line between life and death. No one would spoil anyone. Those who were too delicate, too cowardly, too emotional, and even dragged down the entire team's performance because of their personal reasons, had no chance of staying in the base. Li Nanheng did not say it clearly, but it could be considered as an invisible slap in the face for some newcomers. Li Nanheng did not say anything more and ended his words with the word scram. He threw the microphone back into Ah Feng's hand and turned to leave. As he left, he reached out and suddenly hugged Feng Ling. Not only did he leave, but he also took Feng Ling away. Feng Ling was about to break free, but the man had already hugged her in public. Right now, even if she jumped hundreds of meters away, she could not block the scene that had been seen by everyone. Originally, the matter between her and Li Nanheng had been spread by the newcomers. Now, wasn't he clearly telling the newcomers that she was his woman? She turned to look at him. Li Nanheng received her gaze but did not let go. Ignoring the group of trash behind him, he brought her away from the training ground and casually held her hand. As he held it in his hand, he suddenly glanced at her. "Why is your hand so cold? You scared me." Now that there was no one around, she could only give up and stop struggling. She only said, "I thought you really planned to cancel all the candidates for this assessment. After all, they have been training for so long. Their recent emotional outbursts probably have something to do with me. First of all, I'm a woman, and they didn't believe me from the beginning. Later, although they accepted me, I was in the hospital for a while and didn't come back for a few days, so they thought the matter was complicated. I've been thinking about Jean Wan and didn't have the mood to comfort them, so it led to some people's extreme emotions today. But in the end, they have already worked very hard. It's all my fault. You can give them a small punishment. I definitely support this, but canceling the candidates is really too serious. You can give them a small punishment. I definitely support this, but canceling the quota is really too serious." Seeing that the man only looked at her and did not speak, Feng Ling quickly grabbed his sleeve with her other hand. Before the next assessment, the training time that should end at 4:00 every day will be extended by 3 hours. After dinner, they will train from 6:30 to 9:30. How about that? As she spoke, she looked at him eagerly. No matter what, they are all people I brought up. I can slowly get used to their temperament and character. Give them another chance and leave the quota for them. Seeing that the little woman's eyes gradually softened, Li Nanheng's eyes gradually smiled. Are you begging me? Seeing him smile, Feng Ling knew that he was only smiling at her. He was probably still not satisfied with the group of newcomers. She also knew where those people were wrong and what they were sure about, but after getting along with them for a month, she understood their strengths and weaknesses very well. She believed that before the next assessment, she would definitely be able to make them change all these. She still held his sleeve. Can you? Is this how you beg people? Li Nanheng glanced at the way she was holding his sleeve. If he didn't let go, she wouldn't let him go. Feng Ling paused. Feng Ling paused. She wanted to say that he was the one who refused to let her go, but it wasn't good to argue with him about this matter. She only said, I think that although they are in the wrong, at least each of them has great potential. If I recruit a new batch of newcomers, they will also be young and energetic. They will also have to start over. It's better to gradually get used to the people I'm already familiar with. Since you've given the position of the drill master for the newcomers to me, you have to give me this opportunity. Also, believe me, I will definitely keep these 20 people. Li Nanheng curved his lips. Kiss me first. Feng Ling. Why are you still kissing me at this time? Mr. Amo is still lying in the hospital, and the newcomers have just finished their assessment. The fate of the two teams is in your hands. Why are you still kissing me? Li Nanheng coldly sneered. As long as Amo Jingshan doesn't wake up, you will accompany Jean Wan in melancholy? What? Don't you want to live your own life? Feng Ling, there's one more thing you said wrong. The fate of the newcomers is in their own hands. I can't stand in front of them again and again when they go out on missions. They don't have 9 lives. Whether they can stand firm in the base depends on their own ability. You can protect them for a while, but you can't protect them for a lifetime. Even if you can't protect them for a lifetime, you have to give them a chance. All right, I'll give them a chance. Li Nanheng leaned his face closer. I'll give it to them after a kiss. You, Li Nanheng raised his brows in this posture, and his expression clearly hid a hint of success, as though saying that he was so shameless. It was not the first day she had met him. In fact, since Mr. Mo's accident, Feng Ling had not seen him for many days. For the person she liked, Feng Ling would also break many rules. For example, she would never show affection in front of others, but just now, Li Nanheng directly held her waist and left in public. Even if she didn't show off, she was still showing off. For example, although there were no newcomers around, some of the seniors in the base would occasionally pass by. It was true that he missed her, but now he insisted on kissing her at this time. This man was really shameless. Feng Ling clenched her right hand into a fist. After struggling for a few seconds, she quickly turned her head and kissed him on the cheek. It was less than a second. It couldn't be called a kiss at all. In fact, it was just a kiss on his face. Then she quickly took a step back, raised the hand that the man had just let go of, and put it on her mouth. Her neck was red. Because a few familiar brothers from the base hall passed by just now. Although they stiffened their heads and did not turn their heads, the more they did not dare to turn their heads, the more it meant that they had seen it just now. Li Nanheng thought about it. You're the only one who begs so insincerely. If it were anyone else, I wouldn't agree. From his words, Feng Ling heard a glimmer of hope for those newcomers and quickly nodded. Thank you, boss. Li Nanheng was extremely evil and said, can't you change big to big? Chapter 12:24. Feng Ling didn't understand what he meant at first, but after a few seconds, she understood what he meant. She said in a muffled voice, I'm not married to you. It's not appropriate to call you that. Li Nanheng sneered. You really refuse to give up until all hope is gone. But even if Li Nanheng wanted to tell her the fact that Feng Ling had married him 3 years ago, the untimely cry in her stomach interrupted his plan to immediately acknowledge her as his wife. After all, she had to eat. How long has it been since you last ate? Not long. Maybe it's noon. Or maybe I was so busy in the morning that I forgot. In fact, Feng Ling only ate once yesterday morning and hadn't eaten much since then. She didn't have much appetite, and because of her menstrual period, she was not feeling well. She was too busy with the assessment today, so she didn't want to eat anything at all. However, she didn't expect such an embarrassing thing to happen to her. She was talking to Li Nanheng, but her stomach actually made a sound. At this moment, the newcomers had come out one by one, especially the people of Team 2. When they came out and saw that Boss Li and Drill Master Feng Ling were still outside, they all looked embarrassed and scared. They couldn't wait to take a detour, fearing that Boss Li, who had been secretly scolded by them many times a few days ago, would be unhappy and punish them. Although Li Nanheng wanted to single out a few boys to teach them a lesson, he was worried that Feng Ling was not in a good state during her menstrual period and that she hadn't eaten, so he greeted the drill master of Team 2 and asked the newcomers of the 2 teams to go out for a meal. The newcomers of the 2 teams were worried that they wouldn't even be qualified to mingle in front of Boss in the future. When they came out, they were all dejected. When they suddenly heard that Boss Li was treating them to a meal, they didn't know whether it was to drive them away or the base plan to give them another chance. They were all extremely nervous, but they didn't want to miss the opportunity to eat with their idol, so they all agreed. What was even more unexpected was that Boss Li, who had just told them to scram expressionlessly on the training ground today, would actually treat them to hot pot. The weather was so cold, but the legendary iron-faced Yama Boss Li was so warm. Li Nanheng sent someone out of the base to book a place. The sky had just turned dark, and the base sent more than a dozen cars to send the newcomers to the place for dinner. Of course, although Boss Li was treating, he definitely wouldn't sit at the same table as them. However, this was the United States after all. It wasn't easy to find such a large, luxurious, and delicious hot pot restaurant. Furthermore, it was Boss's invitation. Even if they couldn't sit at Boss's table, everyone felt honored. Li Nanheng's table included Feng Ling, Feng, and the others, as well as several old people in the base hall, including the sniper team, Han Jin, Xiao Su, and the others. They were all acquaintances. Because they were too familiar with each other, Feng Ling was much more at ease. She didn't want to be poked by the curious gazes of the newcomers again and again. Not long after, the waiter of the Hot Pot City brought in all the ingredients needed for these large tables. Tam shouted excitedly and pushed Kay at the same time. "Brother, I never thought that one day, Boss Li would treat me to a meal, and it's even hot pot. Oh my god. Boss, how did you know that we've been craving hot pot recently? It's really hard to find something that tastes good in Los Angeles." "I don't know." Li Nanheng brought over 2 plates of Feng Ling's favorite food and placed them in front of her. "I only know that Feng Ling likes to eat it." Tam laughed shamelessly. "Whatever, as long as I have something to eat." "Aya, the weather is so cold now. Eating hot pot is a perfect match." "Feng Ling, in the future, you have to order more delicious food in front of Boss. This way, we might have a chance to have a few meals with him." "Aya, have you ordered beef?" Come, bring me 2 more plates of beef. There's one next to it." Han Jin glanced at him. Tam turned to see 2 plates on the table and immediately put the meat into the hot pot with a smile. Li Nanheng took the fruit that Feng Ling usually liked to eat and placed it in front of her. "The low-ingredient hot pot I brought you last time is from this chain store near the hotel over there. I've asked around. The taste of several chain stores is the same. There's no difference. It's also very close to the base. If you still want to eat in the future, I can bring you here often." Feng Ling picked up a red cherry tomato from the plate next to her and put it in her mouth. The sour and sweet taste made her feel comfortable. She then took the initiative to put the vegetables in front of her into the hot pot, picked up an orange, peeled it, and very naturally brought the orange to the man's mouth. Li Nanheng, who had always hated eating oranges. He looked at the woman's white fingers and the orange piece that was brought to his mouth. Under the gaze of everyone at the table, he opened his mouth and ate it. Xiao Su, Han Jin, and Ah Feng, who knew Li Nanheng's habits very well, *CK, did they see wrongly? Boss Li actually ate an orange? He didn't vomit? He actually swallowed it? Eat it yourself. Li Nanheng, who had been fed 3 mouthfuls in a row, could not hold on any longer. Although he would most likely be able to drink poison even if Feng Ling fed him poison, the power of this orange was too strong. He really could not take it anymore. He pressed down her hand. "Eat what you like first." Then, the man fed another cherry tomato into her mouth, successfully stopping her from raising her hand to feed him. In fact, Feng Ling was actually because the fate of so many newcomers was still in his hands. If Boss Li was unhappy and kicked them all out of the base, what could she do? Therefore, even though she was embarrassed, she still subconsciously wanted to do something. However, she was not good at pleasing others, so she did not even care what fruit she picked up. She only felt that orange pieces were easier to feed. When she realized what she had fed him, she turned her eyes abruptly and met the man's smiling gaze. "I say, the 2 of you." The 2 of them were feeding each other. The entire table was stuffed with dog food. Ah Feng said, "Restrain yourself, can't you restrain yourself a little? There are so many people here. They are all waiting to eat hot pot, but in the end, they were fed by your dog food first. Are you going to let them eat? This is not the base." I'm dating my own woman. It's not like we're at the entrance of the base hall. Are you going to interfere? Li Nanheng glanced at him. You've been in the Li family for so long. Have you really not learned the slightest ability to read people's expressions? Ah Feng. He knew that he would bear a grudge against him for affecting Boss Li's love life. Ah Feng's twitching expression and the expressions of the others at the table who pretended not to see or hear clearly did not affect Li Nanheng's desire to fall in love with his little wife. Because of Ah Feng's words, Feng Ling felt that she should restrain herself. She was about to stand up and change seats when the man stretched out his long arm and placed it on the back of her chair. His voice was light but had an irresistible deterrent force. Sit down. Begging for monthly votes. Chapter 1225. Feng Ling sat down directly. Seeing that Feng Ling was so obedient to Boss Li, everyone at the table couldn't help sighing. Little Feng Ling, you are no longer the Feng Ling who appears to be obedient but doesn't take Boss seriously in your heart, Han Jin said and shook his head. No, I used to be obedient, Feng Ling said. Yes, I can prove it. Our Feng Ling has always been absolutely obedient in the base. She has never been disloyal. She is very obedient. Kay shouted with the smell of alcohol in his mouth. Tisk, everywhere. Han Jin squinted at him and then looked at Feng Ling, saying, the past is the past, and now is the present. Don't you know who the man beside you was before and who the man beside you is now? Feng Ling said, he used to be boss. What about now? Xiao Su answered with a smirk. Now he is also old. Feng Ling didn't finish her sentence, and Li Nanheng next to her said lightly, now he is my husband. Puff. Kay almost spat out the mouthful of wine he had just drunk. He quickly turned his head and coughed several times in a row. His face turned red, and when he saw Feng Ling's face was also red, he immediately grinned. Yes. Ignoring the gazes of the others, Li Nanheng knew that Feng Ling was thin-skinned when it came to this kind of thing. She couldn't express what she thought or said, so he didn't say more. After teasing her, he stopped talking about this and began to talk about other things. Then Li Nanheng took Feng Ling, avoided the others, and took her to a relatively secluded corridor behind the hot pot restaurant. The two of them didn't spend much time together in the base. She finally returned to the base after so many years, but in the past month or so since she came back, she spent most of her time with the newcomers. Besides, she had been accompanying Jean Wan in the hospital for the past few days, and the two of them only really got along with each other for 2 short days last weekend. After that, there were so many big and small things to deal with, so they didn't have time to spend together. There wasn't much time left for each other. Even if they were in the same place, the time where they could only occasionally pass each other or exchange a few words was far from enough for people who had finally gotten to know each other. Li Nanheng wanted to have some quiet space with Feng Ling to talk to her, to make her happy, to make her feel more relaxed and happy, to temporarily forget the burden of the youth training team, and to temporarily forget about Jean Wan. Apart from the people in the base, she rarely interacted with anyone else. She had very few friends, but Jean Wan was one of them. He could understand her concern, but seeing that she didn't smile for the past few days, although he could understand, he still hoped that she could relax. Ms. Wanzhou took Jean Wan back to the Xiao family in Los Angeles. They will take good care of her. Don't worry about the hospital anymore. They will inform us if anything happens. If you miss Jean Wan, you can go see her when it's convenient. Li Nanheng said as he brought her to the window at the end of the corridor. The temperature in this hot pot city was a little hot, but there was a little cool wind by the window, making people feel that the air temperature was moderate and very comfortable. Feng Ling nodded. Seeing that she was so obedient, Li Nanheng vaguely heard what she said to the newcomer outside the door today. Although she was just a woman, her voice was clear and clean, but each word was sonorous and powerful. No matter how cold and distant she was in front of others, no matter how serious she was in front of the newcomers, in front of him, she had already broken through her previous caution and restraint. She was more and more used to softening her temper in front of him. She was so warm and gentle that it made him want to hold her in his arms and rub her hard into his body. Li Nanheng raised his hand and gently rubbed her head. I know that after returning to the base from the hospital, you've been under a lot of pressure. Fortunately, your ability to adjust yourself has never disappointed me. Those newcomers have been temporarily rejected by me, but I believe that one day, they will gradually grow in my hands and become a batch of members that I recognize. Be patient. I'll be patient too. Feng Ling knew that Li Nanheng didn't completely fall out with her at the assessment site today because he had given her enough face, but what he said later showed that he was really dissatisfied. But she never expected that Li Nanheng would compromise to this extent because of her. Boss Li, who had always been in the base and would never spoil anyone, actually patiently waited for her to grow up with the newcomers. It would be a lie to say that she was not touched. Feng Ling didn't know what to say, but instinctively reached out to hold his waist, leaned into his arms, and gave him a real hug. This was the first time that the little woman had taken the initiative to throw herself into his arms with such a soft expression. Li Nanheng smiled in satisfaction, hugged her firmly, lowered his head, and kissed her on the face. As if kissing was not enough, he lowered his head and kissed the corner of her mouth. Feng Ling was afraid that any passing waiter or people from the base would see it, so she subconsciously dodged. Before she could dodge, her chin was pinched by the man and kissed her. Li, you. Feng Ling's voice paused because of his kiss and she looked at him. Li Nanheng originally only wanted to kiss her, but because she was staring at him at such a close distance, he took a deep breath and pinched her chin. At the same time, when he thought of the thing she was holding in the bathroom today, the veins on his forehead throbbed. The heavens seemed to be purposely going against him. It wasn't easy for him to return to the base. It wasn't easy for him to find time to be affectionate with his little wife, but her period came at the right time. Feng Ling didn't know what the man was thinking. She just couldn't imagine that as a drill master of the newcomers, she had to establish her prestige in front of the newcomers again. She had to recover from her bad state and be a good figure in front of the newcomers, but now she was kissing here. If a few newcomers passed by, her face, would she still want it? Feeling Feng Ling's grip on his waist tightened, she was obviously nervous. Li Nanheng kissed and carried her to a corner. He was about to continue kissing her hard when his phone suddenly rang. He impatiently took out his phone and glanced at it, then strangely glanced at the many tables over there, and picked up the phone. Speak. Xiao Su chuckled on the phone. Boss, Feng said that it's rare for us to come out today, so we should have a good night. He plans to treat everyone to a hot spring in the nearby hot spring hotel before going back. Let's relax together. Chapter 12:26. Feng realized that he had offended Boss Li too much recently and had a rare desire to live. He wanted to take this opportunity to create some ambiguous space for Boss and Feng Ling. Perhaps this way, Boss's anger would dissipate. Li Nanheng, who instantly understood his meaning, snorted coldly. He's considerate. Unfortunately, not to mention soaking in the hot spring, even if he stripped Feng Ling clean and stuffed her into his arms, he still couldn't sleep with her. The most hateful thing in the world was a woman's menstruation. It was neither too early nor too late. It always came at the right time. After hanging up the phone, Li Nanheng grabbed Feng Ling with one hand, continued to hold her by his side, and walked out. Where are we going? Feng Ling asked. Someone specially invited us to soak in the hot spring in order to atone for his sins. Hot spring? I've never soaked in it. Li Nanheng turned to see the ignorant curiosity in Feng Ling's eyes, gritted his teeth, and hated her menstruation again. After eating hot pot, they went to soak in the hot spring. This kind of treatment could be said to be rare in the base. This group of newcomers who came out to eat were really lucky. The point was that although these newcomers had been in the base for a month, they still didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Apart from knowing that the deputy drill master, oh no, Boss Lee was not easy to provoke and they shouldn't easily approach and offend him, this group of newcomers would still gather together from time to time to quietly discuss various new things. When they first entered the Hot Spring Hotel, a group of people still bowed in front of Li Nanheng and said that Boss was good. In the past, they didn't recognize Mount Tai as they had eyes but were all ignored by Li Nanheng, so they could only gather aside and didn't dare to say anything. But when they changed into their swimming trunks and went to the hot spring pool on the first floor of the hotel that was built like a mountain rock wall, they formed groups of 3 to 5 and went into the small pools to whisper to each other. When Han Jin and the others passed by the entrance of some small pools, they could still hear those people talking about the fact that Boss Lee was actually the deputy drill master, and the deputy drill master was actually Boss Lee. They still hadn't figured it out yet. They all said that it was fortunate that they didn't directly confront the deputy drill master, otherwise they would really die today. Fong Ling was the last to enter. As she was a woman, she went to the women's changing room by herself. Then, because of her period, she specially bought a pair of waterproof shorts from the staff of the Hot Spring Hotel. Then, she put on the swimsuit she bought with the shorts she had just bought. The swimsuit she bought was a slightly more conservative style. After all, there were so many men in the base. If she went into the hot spring wearing all kinds of bikinis like the others in this locker room, Li Nanheng would probably be the first to pull her out with a green face. After changing, Fong Ling entered the hot spring. However, this place was really built like a cave. There were all kinds of small ponds everywhere. There were all kinds of medicinal ponds, rose ponds, and everything. Furthermore, there were small signs engraved on the stone walls outside each small pond, stating the temperature and effect of the water in each small pond. She walked all the way in, listening to the laughter and noise in each small pool. When she walked near a medicinal bath, she suddenly heard someone talking. "Hey, did you see Boss Lee when he was changing in the men's locker room just now?" "No, Boss Lee's locker room shouldn't be with us. The men's locker rooms are all connected. Even the richest man in the world has to walk in from there." Ah Fong and the others were all there just now. "Boss Lee must be there too, but we just didn't meet him. So what if we meet him? Can we go up and suck up to him?" "I don't fucking dare. A few days ago, weren't those people in our team always talking about the deputy drill master in private? Damn it, I'm scared when I think about it. I knew this deputy drill master's aura was different. Not to mention the main drill master, even the second in command of the base like Ah Fong was respectful to him. At that time, we just didn't dare to think about it. Otherwise, if the second in command of the base treated him so carefully, who else could it be? We should have known it was Boss Lee, TSK. Hey, by the way, Drill Master Fong Ling and Boss Lee, is there a need to say it? Anyone who is not blind can see that they are obviously a couple. I really didn't expect that. Although Drill Master Fong Ling is indeed quite beautiful, she is usually so serious and doesn't have any femininity. I thought a woman like her would be more attractive to those little fangirls. Boss Lee is tall and masculine. Don't you usually like long-haired Lolitas? Lolita my foot. I think Drill Master Fong is more interesting. At least, she's not pretentious. She's much more charming than those little girls who speak with their throats pinched all day and scream when their hands are scratched. She heard so many words just by passing by. Fong Ling thought that the existence of Li Nanheng really destroyed her cold image. If she wanted to be more dignified in the future, she would have to think of other ways. She was about to continue walking forward when she suddenly heard another sentence. Boss Lee's nose is so straight and his figure is so strong. I guess the size of his lower body is not small, ha 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 ha. It's a pity that I didn't see it in the locker room just now. Otherwise, I can really go and secretly watch it. Hearing this, Fong Ling, who was already prepared to leave, decisively and quickly left, trying to walk as far away as possible. The area of this hot spring room was very large, and it was rugged. She had to walk around, so she couldn't see which pools were in front of her. After walking for a while, Feng Lin seemed to be lost. She looked around and could only find a place where she couldn't hear them. Anyway, it was not convenient for a woman to soak in the same pool as others, so she might as well find an empty pool and soak in it by herself. She had just walked to a quiet place on the other side and looked inside. Seeing that there was no one in the pool, she was about to walk in when suddenly a figure jumped up behind her. She turned her eyes vigilantly, but before she could see who it was, she was suddenly pushed against the smooth stone wall. The man lowered his head and was about to kiss her, but she looked at the face in front of her with a shocked expression. After confirming that the person in front of her was Li Nanheng, her tense body slowly relaxed. Feeling her tension, Li Nanheng didn't kiss her. Looking at her wide-eyed expression, he smiled and pinched her cheek. "Are you scared? Who do you think it is? Who dares to touch me like this?" It was because she knew that others didn't have the guts, so even though she subconsciously wanted to kick his family jewels, she still held back. Chapter 12:27. Even though she did not soak in the hot spring, the temperature of this place was still hot. The surroundings were surrounded by white mist, which made the man's action of pressing her against the stone wall appear much more intimate. Feng Ling shifted her eyes to look at the empty pool inside. "What pool is this?" Li Nanheng glanced at the stone carvings outside and said, "It's an ordinary spring pool." In fact, most of these so-called hot springs are the same. Unless it's a hotel opened at the location of the spring, it's basically just a gimmick. They put all kinds of things in the water and put all kinds of colors and smells in it. It's not as clean as this ordinary spring pool. Feng Ling didn't quite understand, but when she heard that this pool was clean and saw that there was indeed a location connected to the spring, she guessed that it was because this place was closest to the mountain range and was too close to it. Furthermore, no one would specially come to soak in an ordinary hot spring pool. No wonder there was no one here. She nodded, gently pushed him away, and turned to walk in. She stood by the pool and looked down. Then she stretched out her feet and gently touched the water. The temperature was a little hot, but it was not hot. The water here was about 42 degrees. Li Nanheng saw the temperature outside and walked over. Seeing that she was standing by the side to test the water, he did not say anything. He untied the bath towel on his body and entered the water. The moment the man undid his towel and entered the water wearing only his black swimming trunks, Feng Ling's gaze faltered on his body. Nanheng did not show the slightest bit of fear. It was clear that it was rare for her to have a chance to admire his perfect figure. He even gave her a devilish smile. Feng Ling, what was he smiling at? Crazy. Earlier, she wanted to ask if the water was so hot. Didn't he feel hot just sitting in it? She also turned back to look at the temperature. After confirming that it was 42 degrees, she leaned over to Li Nanheng and touched the temperature of the water beside him. She then looked at him and asked, "Is it hot?" "It's not hot." Li Nanheng gave her an affirmative answer. She looked at his body in the water and felt that it was really comfortable to soak in. Just as she was hesitating about which direction to enter the water, the man's arm suddenly reached out in her direction and grabbed her waist. He pulled her down along with the bath towel on her. With a plop, Feng Ling fell into the water. She hurriedly jumped out of the water, raised her hand to wipe the water, and said angrily in the white mist, "Li Nanheng, what are you doing?" Cough. The man saw her struggling in the water with a flushed face. He just wanted to tease her, but in the end, he couldn't help but grab her. He stepped forward and hugged the woman who was still struggling in the water. He bent down and kissed her hard on the lips. Feng Ling looked at his face and eyes and felt as though she was about to be sucked in by his eyes. She was so angry that she wanted to kick him, but in the end, she softened in the hot water. His feelings were like a raging flame that had been doused with boiling oil. Even water couldn't extinguish it. The heat waves surged and turned everything into ashes. Under the kiss, their lips and tongues intertwined. The two of them were trying their best to absorb each other's breath, but it was as though there was a curtain separating them. They only felt that it was not enough, not enough. Li Nanheng helped Feng Ling up from the spring. Only then did she notice that when she stood up, the spring water did not pass her ribs. He pushed her against the side of the wet and hard spring. As he kissed her passionately, he tore the bath towel on her body. Earlier, she was also wrapped in a bath towel outside her swimsuit. Before she was ready to enter the water, she was suddenly pulled down by him. The bath towel on her body was wet and wrapped around her body. This was indeed the place connected to the largest spring in the hotel. Unlike the other hot pools with all kinds of aromatherapy items, the water in the spring was clean and hot. The temperature was slightly hot, but it was the healthiest and most comfortable temperature. Occasionally, the water that came out of the spring was slightly turbulent, splashing on the stone wall next to it, stirring up little splashes. The only sound that could be heard was the gurgling of the spring, and nothing else could be heard. Feng Ling was pressed against the stone wall by the spring and kissed. Her bathrobe had long been thrown away. Although the newly bought swimsuit was very conservative, it still revealed a large portion of her back. The man saw that the material of her chest was connected and directly rubbed her smooth and tender snow-white back. To be kissed to such an extent in this hot spring hotel where other people might pass by at any time, a certain sense of shame made Feng Ling even more sensitive. She panted under Li Nanheng's comfort. Suddenly, she felt the man lower his head and bite the strap of her swimsuit on her shoulder. She immediately called out softly to stop him, but before she could do so, the man had already lowered his head even more, and kissed. Her entire body instantly tensed up, and even her toes that were submerged under the water curled up. Her face, which she usually pretended to be dignified in front of the newcomers, gradually became confused because of this tide of passion. Her expression of struggling between indulgence and rationality was sexy enough to drive people crazy. Li Nanheng. Her voice was hoarse. Because of the man's kiss, her eyes were half open and she could not help but gasp. "What do you call me?" The man took the time to raise his head and kiss her lips comfortingly. He asked in a low, threatening voice. "Feng Ling, call me hubby." The water mist filled the air, covering everything. Seeing that she had been maintaining her rationality and refusing to call him, Li Nanheng turned her back. She could instantly feel Li Nanheng pressing against her underwater. Her face was pressed against the stone wall. It was a little cold, but her body was too hot in the hot spring. This made the man's body even more hot. She trembled because of this overflowing tide of passion, and her eyes were a little unfocused. All of a sudden, the man pushed against her from behind. Even though there was a layer of her swimsuit and waterproof shorts inside, she was caught off guard. She could not help but gasp, don't." The man behind her paused. He seemed to be stimulated by her suddenly low, hoarse, and somewhat soft voice. He held her waist tightly and moved hard under the water. It was through the clothes. It was through the clothes. Even so, Feng Ling was so stimulated that she was about to burst into tears. The person who was in the water with him was Feng Ling. This matter had always been difficult for Li Nanheng to endure. He leaned over her. From the surface of the water, he only caused a splash, but under the hot spring, his movements were threatening. Feng Ling was in a daze when she heard the man ask, "What did you call me?" Boss, N. Bo, you. The woman pressed against the stone wall's voice was moist and hoarse. Her eyes were filled with sparks, and her eyes were red. Chapter 12:28. You, hubby. Her voice was so hoarse that it was almost inaudible, but it caused Li Nanheng's eyes to darken. The man's movements caused the water to splash. The warmth of the hot spring combined with the touch of Feng Ling's swimsuit made the man understand that he was about to lose his mind. He took a deep breath. Before he could do anything crazy, he abruptly turned Feng Ling over and pressed his chest against hers. The hardness and softness collided. The water vapor rising from the direction of the spring blurred their eyes, and the constant temperature was still very hot water splashed on their faces. Fong Ling was brought away by the true emotions and feelings in her heart. Looking at her, Li Nanheng bent down and kissed her fiercely. He kissed her urgently and kissed her lips hungrily. He kissed her with almost violent strength. His other hand gradually moved down, stroked her waist, and held it. Fong Ling had been in the base for a long time, and no one had really come into close contact with her. He didn't know that under her tough appearance, her entire body was actually soft, and her waist was also slender. He pressed her harder into his arms. Fong Ling inexplicably felt that the man's hand on her waist was so ambiguous that it was stimulating. She was also stimulated to the point that she half closed her eyes and raised her neck to moan softly. "I am now." She wanted to say that she was on her period and it was inconvenient. However, she only had time to say 3 words before her voice was sealed between Li Nanheng's lips and teeth. Li Nanheng hurriedly hugged her even tighter, rubbing against her clothes and rubbing his hands against her body, stimulating her. He tightly hugged the little woman he had loved for many years and felt Fong Ling trembling slightly in his arms. Her trembling made him feel satisfied, and it made him crazy and infatuated. After the kiss, their lips and teeth were still pressed against each other. In this hot spring, Fong Ling almost lost herself in such an uncontrollable kiss. She subconsciously opened her eyes and looked down at the man's naked chest. She didn't know when her hand had started to caress his chest. With just a glance, her scalp went numb, and she quickly moved her hand away. However, just as her hand was about to leave his body, Li Nanheng suddenly grabbed her wrist and pressed her hand down into the water. Fong Ling's eyes, which had turned slightly red from the kiss, were now moistened by the surrounding mist. She struggled gently but did not struggle too hard. The man pressed her hand down and bent down to kiss her ear. His breathing had yet to calm down. He said seductively and huskily, "I know it's not convenient for you right now, but I can't get out of the water like this. Help me." Fong Ling's hand was held so tightly by him. In the warm fog, Fong Ling's heart trembled because of the man's low and hoarse voice. She obediently pressed her hand against his. Just as they were about to explode, Li Nanheng suddenly carried Fong Ling out of the water to prevent her from dirtying the water in the spring. At the same time, he pressed her heavily into a hidden crack in the stone wall. He murmured, "If we don't quickly become husband and wife, I'm afraid I won't be able to take it." Then he couldn't help but hold her cheeks, which were burning red from his continuous movements, and kiss her hard. By the side, the water in the spring was gurgling, and the water in the spring gradually flowed faster. The white steam and the sound of the water covered this small space very well. Even if they were not in the water, they were not worried that someone would see anything when passing by because the fog was really too thick. Fong Ling couldn't breathe from Li Nanheng's kiss. Her lips were slightly swollen. She took a chance to catch her breath and then was kissed hard again. She was a little distracted and her eyes were unfocused. For a moment, she didn't understand what he meant by the name of husband and wife. In the end, Li Nanheng abruptly bit the tender skin between her neck and shoulder. At the same time, he let out a long, muffled groan. A moment later, he hugged her, buried his face in her neck, and pressed against her neck, panting for a long time. In the end, he gently and lovingly kissed her neck, shoulder, chin, mouth, nose, and finally back to her lips. He kissed her again and again as though he was full of love. "Stop kissing me." Fong Ling's face was flushed and her hands were trembling. "If this goes on, how am I going to accompany them for shooting practice tomorrow? I can't even pick up the gun." Hearing Fong Ling's low protest, Li Nanheng's eyes darkened. It was obviously not enough to relieve the gap that they couldn't be together these days. He kissed her cheek and panted lowly. "Baby, I love you." She knew that he really loved her, but when he said the word love so straightforwardly, Fong Ling subconsciously pressed her head against the man's shoulder and was too embarrassed to look at him. Li Nanheng smiled in satisfaction and hugged her tightly. Then he lowered his head to look at the mess he had made on her swimsuit. His eyes darkened and his voice was muffled. "There's a single bathroom at the back. Let's go take a shower together. N. Although this man tried his best to restrain himself and did not do anything else, Feng Ling was inevitably bullied for a while. He hugged and kissed her. Under the shower full of hot water, she couldn't even take a proper shower. In the end, she was kissed until she leaned against the wall. Li Nanheng took the shower down and washed her from head to toe. After washing, he hugged and continued to kiss, as though even if he couldn't do anything else, he wanted to kiss back all the emptiness he had felt these days. The other people in the hot spring room had long discovered that Boss Li and Feng Ling had disappeared, but they tacitly didn't ask a single word. Even the newcomers who were not very sensible could roughly guess what was going on. They could joke about anything, but they didn't dare to joke around this time. After all, if they really said anything wrong, their lives would be over. She tried to escape several times, but he pulled her back and continued to press her between his chest and the wall. Her lips were already red and swollen, and now they were numb from his kisses. She was so embarrassed by his torture that she tried to escape several times, but he pulled her back and continued to press her between his chest and the wall. Her lips were already red and swollen, and now they were numb. Don't kiss me. Feng Ling seemed to hear someone walking past the bathroom and quickly whispered. Li Nanheng kissed her on the lips again. He had seen her being tormented under him until she lost her soul. He had seen her cry until she couldn't control her body and her eyes were dazed. Thus, looking at her who was still somewhat sober, he couldn't restrain himself. He just wanted to hold her and become one with her soul and body. He wanted her to like everything about him. He wanted her to be comfortable. He wanted her to lose her soul only for him. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.